and have a wonderful day.
Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by narcissists. And that is probably that the narcissist behavior really has nothing to do with other people. This sounds trite, but it really is all about them. Now that can be hard to grasp because, of course, if someone does something specifically to do with you, most of the time in life that would be true. With narcissists, it's really not. It really doesn't have anything to do with you. They aren't really trying to destroy you because you don't matter. Now hear me out. I know we always say their goal is to destroy people, and it is, but their motive is not just because they're trying to cause people pain. Their goal is to destroy the other person to elevate themselves. The other person is not the motive. It has nothing to do with them. You don't even register. This is not a war that they're fighting with you. This is a war they're fighting with themselves, and you're just getting caught in the crossfire. Now that's not to say it's accidental. Not at all. But you or feelings for you or about you or against you is not the motive. Nothing to do with you is the motive. To be perfectly honest and perfectly blunt, you really could be anybody. Their battle is with themselves, and their only motive is self-preservation. At first it seems like narcissists are playing games with other people, but the more you really look into it, it starts to make sense that narcissists are actually using other people to play games with themselves. Other people are just tools that narcissists use to either hurt themselves or make themselves feel good. Other people are literally props in their one-man show. And again, I use the word literally because that's not a metaphor. Now you might say, I'm not a prop, I'm a person. Not to the narcissist. This is something a lot of people don't understand, and that's probably because for most of us, it's difficult to really grasp that level of self-involvement. It's hard to understand a level of self-focus so deep and exclusive that other people are not only not considered, they don't even exist. They're not even seen as people at all. I don't think emotionally it can people. We can intellectually understand and we can say the words, we can explain it to each other, but emotionally I think it's always going to be a mystery. As thinking, feeling, non-narcissistic human beings, we just don't get that. How can it be that the motive of abusive behavior is not solely to hurt the other person? The answer can be found by deconstructing that idea. You have to try to look at it from their point of view, and in order to do that, you have to break it down completely. For starters, we would have to realize that we're seeing the motive through our own eyes as the person being abused. This is going to be a personal perspective because you've been hurt. We are entitled to that perspective 100% because when someone hurts you, it is personal to you. It is not personal to the narcissist, not the way that we would mean that. Why do humans want to hurt other people? Usually it's because they've hurt us first. There are also sadistic people who get off on the pain they're causing to other people. Now, while both of these seem to fit the narcissist, the truth is that neither one of them really do. It isn't you who has hurt the narcissist, and inside they do know that. You're simply a stand-in. You're a representative for their own failure and their own self-hatred. So, although this is the motive they often claim to have, it's false. The hurt and the hatred they feel is coming from within themselves, and they do know that. Every time they attack you, all they're really doing is burning themselves in effigy. Narcissists can also often seem like sadists, and while they may at times seem to enjoy the pain they're causing, they're not really sadistic. Sadists have to see their victims as thinking, feeling humans to get enjoyment out of torturing and hurting them, but narcissists don't really operate that way. The enjoyment they're getting out of it is all self-focused rather than other-focused. They feel good hurting people because it takes pressure off of them. It's like going a couple rounds with your punching bag. It makes you feel good, but not because you hurt the bag. The bag has no feelings. You feel good because you blew off steam. Now, everyone is, of course, different, but the main exception to that would probably be the narcissistic psychopath, because they operate on just a whole different level. Those are the guys that end up becoming serial killers and stuff like that. Then, after we understood all of that, we would have to understand, truly understand, that narcissists do not see people as people the way we see people as people. We see people as individuals with feelings and needs and desires, motivations, aspirations, dreams, goals. Narcissists do not see, understand, or care about any of that. And really, just saying that does not convey how empty their understanding of other humans really is. You are one-dimensional to a narcissist. Like I said, a prop. and you only matter as far as how they can use you to make themselves feel. This is not malicious. They don't see it that way because the person's life is not even considered. Nothing about you matters. Not only does it not matter, they don't even realize any of these things are true, that you have feelings and needs and desires. That's not even on their radar at all. If they are somehow forced to recognize a need or a feeling of another person, the recognition is extremely superficial and they have absolutely no interest in it or understanding of it whatsoever. The only thing they might be remotely interested in is some feelings you might have about them. To the narcissist, every other human being is a mirror they are looking into and either seeing a good reflection of themselves or a bad one. They do not see another person at all. Thirdly, after we understand all of those things, we would have to understand that when all of these previous things are true, the behavior of the narcissist ceases to be abuse in their eyes. It wouldn't matter anyway, though, because of the way their dysfunction is structured. Narcissists are under internal attack by their superego all the time. Therefore, in their mind, they can't be abusers regardless because they're victims. What we call abuse, they would call blowing off steam or defending themselves and things like that. This is very telling. The word abuse involves the acknowledged and purposeful hurting of other people. Blowing off steam doesn't acknowledge anybody else at all. It acknowledges only the narcissist and their feelings and their problems. And that's appropriate since that's how they see everything. How can you abuse a punching bag? You can't. It doesn't have any feelings. So in a very real way, they have no motive to destroy you because as far as they see it, you don't even really exist. Their only motive is to save, preserve, and protect themselves. We find it shocking that they can be so callous, but from their point of view, they haven't done anything odd or terrible. This is how it is. The only real problems are their problems. The only real feelings are their feelings. The only real person is them. I don't know how to explain it any more clearly than that. You can take everything I'm saying literally. Now let's be clear. This does not somehow make their behavior not abuse. It doesn't excuse anything. It doesn't justify anything. The goal of this podcast and of this whole show is to help people understand what they're dealing with. It doesn't matter what the narcissist's motive is because the end result is still the same. Whether their goal is to destroy you or save themselves, they are abusive, manipulative, and completely, totally selfish to the exclusion of everything and everybody else. Understanding their behaviors and motives can not only help you deal with narcissists better, it helps people realize that the problem is within the narcissist, not with them. This can help immensely with letting go of the hurt and the hatred so that people can truly realize it wasn't anything they did and there was nothing they could have done, so they can move on to a happier, healthier life without narcissists and the baggage that comes with that. I hope this cleared a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions. So please keep those coming. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I want to talk to you about power in narcissistic relationships. This is a central theme in narcissistic relationships of all types, so I wanted to address it on the show today. Power is very important to pathologically narcissistic people. They are usually extremely preoccupied with power and control. Some are even obsessed with it. To the narcissist, power is one of the only things that truly matters because if they have power, it means they're not weak or insignificant. It means they can have whatever they want. People who have power are important. They matter. They are admired or even feared. This is what the narcissist wants for themselves, and often they will do whatever they have to do in order to get that. Now, there are some narcissistic people who are extremely driven. They work hard, they're very smooth, they're very manipulative. These narcissists often rise to the position of having power over others, such as in government or other types of authority. Others may become leaders of organizations or somehow in the community. This type of narcissistic person is often more overt, and usually they will be farther down the narcissistic spectrum, even to the point of being psychopathic. The typical type of emotionally driven behavior we usually associate with narcissists may not be immediately observed with this person unless they're under an enormous amount of stress. Even then, it might not be obvious. They may be extraordinarily self-controlled and calm, even dispassionate. This is because, though emotional motivations often still exist within these narcissists, those that are more overtly emotional are usually not capable of the type of self-control that's necessary to achieve this kind of success. Someone who has a meltdown when they can't buy a pair of shoes, for example, probably would not be able to function adequately in the world of politics or as a corporate shark. There are exceptions, of course, but as a general rule, those who are more successful are usually less obviously emotional or dysfunctional. This is the more traditional understanding of narcissistic people, power-hungry, corporate or political titans who will stop at nothing to get what they want. However, just because someone doesn't fall into that category doesn't mean they're not a narcissist, and it doesn't mean they're not seeking power. Take, for example, the narcissist who holds the entire family hostage with hysterics or violence until they get what they want. Is this person not controlling and manipulative? Are they not seeking power over others? What about the narcissist who uses sex or money to get their way? What about the narcissist who is so insecure and fragile they have to know your every move and they can't be left alone or they'll fall apart? What about the narcissist who takes control over your life, quote, for your own good because they're so concerned and helpful? What about the narcissist who uses their intelligence to trick people into doing what they want? All of these different people are doing the same thing. They're trying to exercise power over others. They attempt to do it in different ways, but that does not change the end goal. Whether they use emotion, intelligence, concern, or force, it's all the same. They are attempting to force others into doing what they want them to do without consideration for what the other person wants or would like to do. The only needs that matter are their own. The means they use to try to control other people will usually be dependent on what their particular strengths are, the kind of person they are, and what they have learned is effective. For example, some narcissistic people will use violence or threats to try to force other people into doing what they want. This is probably because this is what the narcissist has learned will work for them, and it's likely a reflection of their own particular type of personality. Other narcissists may use guilt or concern to try to control others for the same reasons, and some may use both or neither, depending on who they're dealing with or the situation they're in. The concept of power is very, very important to narcissistic people. They often seek power just for its own sake, and dealing with them can be just one nightmare power struggle after another. They create contention and conflict over everything. Everything becomes a contest and a competition where, if they're not the winner, there's a huge blow-up or some other type of punishment. Most narcissists don't like their power or authority to be challenged because this creates the fear in them that they don't really have any. It gnaws at them. People with no power don't matter, and this is the ultimate death for the narcissist. Death by insignificance. This is why there are narcissists who seem like they have everything they want, yet they fall apart because one thing happens that they couldn't control, or one situation occurs where they feel like they lost. Pathologically narcissistic people feel very weak and helpless inside. They're not able to regulate their own self-worth, and they're not able to fulfill their needs on their own. They need to dominate and control others so that they can be assured their needs will be fulfilled without interruption. People who are not being controlled just follow their own agenda. They do whatever they want to do, and this may not include attending to the narcissist's many needs. So the narcissist endeavors to make sure that people are as preoccupied with their needs as they are. They do this by creating an environment where their needs are the most important thing. The various tactics and manipulations they use are all employed to this end. If they feel it's not working, they will often rage at this slight until their needs are firmly seated in the position of top importance once again. When you're dealing with a pathologically narcissistic person, it's important to remember that they cannot feel comfortable or secure in the relationship unless you're under their control, period. If they had their way, you would do nothing but what they want you to do 24 hours a day. You would be like a doll sitting on the shelf waiting for them to come and play with you. Narcissists live with a huge amount of stress and fear because so much of their survival is predicated on controlling the behavior and emotions of other people. They cannot exert even basic control over themselves, yet they somehow believe that they're going to be able to control other people. Of course, they're not, and people generally find this out pretty quickly, and a lot of them just leave the situation. Those who don't leave often end up hating the narcissist, and in the end, the narcissist still loses. They want to be loved and admired and respected, and the best they usually end up with is someone who feels too trapped to leave. This is the difference between you and a pathologically narcissistic person. You can understand the concept of true power even if they don't. You can learn that the only power anyone really has is over themselves, and you can also learn that that's the only power anybody needs. You can be free from the emotional bondage that absolutely tortures narcissistic people every single day. And you can earn true love, true admiration, and true respect by being a person that gives these things to others rather than attempting to force them to fulfill your needs for you because you can't do it yourself. That is something that pathologically narcissistic people can never hope to achieve. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online and over the phone, so if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the bookings tab, or you can use the link that's available down in the information section for this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I'm going to talk to you about the false self of the narcissist. We often hear this mentioned, but what is it really? What does it do? What is it for? The overwhelming majority of pathologically narcissistic people are the adult victims of childhood abuse, often from a narcissistic parent. And by the way, overindulgence and spoiling is abuse. They experience all the same things that victims of narcissistic abuse are familiar with. As a child, it's very difficult for them to psychologically defend against this abuse or to develop normally. Their mind is just too preoccupied with surviving. As a result of that, there are certain key steps in development that seem to be missed. The earlier the abuse or neglect occurs, the worse the problems will be. The inability to separate the self from external objects is probably the biggest missed step. Failure in this area is what results in narcissism and in the lack of formation of identity. The ability to acknowledge, understand, control, and process emotions is another big one. Empathy is not nurtured and doesn't develop. Healthy boundaries don't form. There are problems with schema and object permanence. Basically, we could say their mind does not develop beyond the emotional equivalent of a toddler. They cannot handle their own emotions, they cannot tolerate frustration, and they believe that their well-being is the responsibility of other people. It's very like the way toddlers are. It's the parent's job to assume responsibility for the toddler's emotions and emotional well-being because a child that young can't do it themselves. It's the parent's job to soothe and comfort the baby because the baby can't comfort or soothe themselves. Pathologically narcissistic people cannot do this either. They have primitive defense mechanisms in place instead. One of them, the main one, is the false self. It's all a very technical explanation in some ways, involving the narcissist's inability to separate the self from internal objects, particularly idealized or deified objects, and dealing with self-object transference. But you don't need a technical explanation to understand that when a child is abused, they end up feeling badly about themselves. Their feelings become what they've been told. Essentially, they see themselves the way other people see them, namely their parents. The adult pathological narcissist has never grown out of this immature way of functioning. As a child, they were abused and ended up with horrible feelings of self-hatred and shame. Many people who were abused as children struggle with this also, but as they grow, they are usually able to mature beyond this and develop independent self-esteem. Narcissists are not able to do that successfully. They have no way to challenge their pathologically abusive and negative inner dialogue. It comes through as absolute truth to them, something they have believed their entire lives. Nearly everything they do is an exercise in trying to shut that inner voice up. As children, because they were unable to create true self-esteem and self-worth to counteract this negativity, they created pretend self-esteem and self-worth. The child does not feel safe, and as a reaction to the devaluation and emotional neglect they're subjected to, they begin to focus solely and intensely on themselves in an attempt to deal with the hurt. They begin to overvalue themselves in self-defense to try to balance out the completely negative with the completely positive. They say, "I'm worthless, but I'm not. In fact, I'm the most important thing in the world." This becomes a continuous dialogue with themselves, a war between what they're told and what they're trying to believe in self-defense. Because the abuse usually continues for their entire childhood, they practice this exact same primitive defense mechanism. They grow into it instead of out of it. Because of their inability to validate their own self-worth and create actual self-esteem, they have no other way to defend themselves. This is where the false self comes in. As the child grows, these beliefs about how horrible and awful they are don't go away. If anything, they're strengthened. Everything bad that happens reinforces it, no matter how silly or even delusional that might seem. Children engage in magical thinking. That means they believe that things happen because of them. Most children grow out of this when they mature, but people who are pathologically narcissistic do not. Even as adults, they still believe everything happens because of them or what they believe or something they did. The pre-narcissistic child wants what all children want, to be loved, to be accepted, to be liked and valued. They find that they cannot achieve these things in their home, and since the parents are idealized, the child believes it's not the parents who are wrong or defective, but that they themselves are. In the movie The Crow, the main character said, "Mother is the name for God on the lips and hearts of little children." This is actually a quote from Thackeray, a British novelist and author, but regardless of where you heard it, it remains true. Parents are seen as perfect and infallible to small children, so if there's a failing, the child will perceive it to be on their own part. If your parents don't love you, you must be very vile. Something must be really wrong with you. This is what the child believes. Because of this, and because they lack a true identity, the child creates a mask that they believe is all the things they are not. This is who they will attempt to present themselves as in order to receive the things they are desperately seeking from other people. It becomes a way of being, a way to circumvent their inability to achieve what they need. No one will love them as they are. They're too horrible, too disgusting, too despicable. But if they can hide that, they might have a chance. Thus, the false self is born. This is who you met when you met the narcissist. This is who shows up in public or with people that don't know the narcissist very well. This is who you spent all your time chasing, trying to find. That's who you were talking about. A mask. It's a person that doesn't exist. Once you see behind that, the narcissist knows the jig is up and they believe they'll be abandoned, even if you don't really understand that what you saw behind was a mask. They feel betrayed and angry. Remember, the false self is not a performance for you or any other people. The false self is for the narcissist. It's the narcissist's protection against their own feelings. It's their way of trying to walk the walk and convince themselves once and for all that they're not all the horrible things they believe themselves to be. They need you to believe it because that helps them believe it. They also believe they will not receive the things they need from people unless they are a good person. This probably goes back to their belief that they were not nurtured or loved by their parents because they could never be good enough. Unfortunately, their definition of a good person is totally unreasonable and they can never achieve it. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has flaws. Nobody's perfect. Because of how they were raised, pathologically narcissistic people believe, as all victims of narcissistic abuse are told, that being a regular human being is wrong and not good enough. Can't have feelings, can't have needs, can't make mistakes, can't have any flaws. Any failure to adhere to this ridiculous belief is seen as an enormous failure on their part. Even small or unimportant mistakes cause the narcissist's negative feelings to pour through and crack their false facade in half. Their feelings overwhelm them, and this is when they engage in abuse, projection, gaslighting, manipulation, and all manner of things designed to help them deny to themselves that they did anything which proved they weren't perfect and therefore not a good person. The biggest problem with the false self is that the narcissist knows it's not real. They are resentful of it and of other people forcing them to use it. They are paranoid someone will see behind it, and they fear the consequences if that happens. They believe they'll be abandoned, and not only do they have a pathological fear of rejection and abandonment, but with no one around to validate their self-worth, they will no longer have a way to defend against the bad feelings. They are desperate to prevent that from happening. That's why a lot of their abuse and manipulation is designed to divert other people's attention away from the narcissist and onto themselves. It's a way of saying, hey, don't look over here, look over there. Anything that threatens this false self with exposure is reacted to as life-threatening, because without it, the narcissist cannot get what they need from other people and will decompensate. It's a knee-jerk reaction of self-defense because they believe they're being viciously attacked. To people who don't understand the personality structure of the narcissist, this is very confusing and even frightening. What the heck are they so mad about? They're more than just angry. They are filled with shame and self-hatred that they can't confront. You dared suggest that they weren't perfect, which means that you have validated their belief that they're bad, that they don't deserve anything, and that they're worthless. This is why people are accused of saying things they didn't say. So you might say, hey, you forgot to take the trash out again. Then they say, that doesn't make me less than you, but you're right, I'm a loser and I never do anything right. And you're like, what? It didn't make any sense to you, but it doesn't have to. Narcissists believe feelings are facts. They feel that way, and that makes it true. Their denial makes them unable to see they're actually projecting their own feelings onto you. You don't think they're a loser and can't do anything right just for forgetting to put the garbage out. They feel that way because any flaw or mistake on their part is seen as a monumental failure. Anyone who's been through narcissistic abuse understands that feeling. It just goes around and around and around. Narcissistic abuse just begets more narcissistic abuse. The false self is the desperate attempt of an immature, childish mind to heal itself from abuse. Their only defense against this is to create a pretend world where it's not true and force everybody else to go along with that. Because of the way they developed, they're not capable of caring about the feelings of other people, nor are they capable of seeing others as human beings who matter. They're also often very, very angry and looking for people to take it out on because this helps them feel more powerful, which boosts their non-existent self-esteem. Basically, it's an abusive situation no matter what. It's a tragic situation all around, and for all the explaining that I've just done here, one phrase probably sums it up the best. Hurt people, hurt people. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you, and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something that is very common in relationships of any kind with pathologically narcissistic people, and that is the fact that they don't listen, and sometimes they can even seem to be incapable of hearing you. You might notice that when you speak to a pathologically narcissistic person, though they seem to be listening and they're often even looking right at you, they then respond with something that has nothing to do with what you just said, or they only seem to hear one part of what you said and somehow manage to come to the exact wrong or opposite conclusion of your words. This is often a huge problem in these kind of relationships, and it is especially bad when the narcissistic person is upset. How upset they are often dictates how much they're able to listen, and if they're too upset, it may be totally useless to even bother talking to this person because they just cannot hear you. Many people think this is deliberate, and for some pathologically narcissistic people, it's probably true. But it also happens because their feelings are so overwhelming to them that that wave of emotion simply blocks everything else out. It can seem like they're changing the subject with their responses to you, or that they're ignoring you, and maybe they are. But often it seems that they're not even hearing you. After dealing with this for a while, you may even be able to recognize the look in their eyes when they're no longer listening to you. They seem to be listening to somebody else talking that only they can hear, and in a way they are. They're listening to the raving, screeching voice of their own feelings. For a pathologically narcissistic person, feelings are facts. Instead of being able to view their feelings objectively as temporary reactions that may or may not be logical, their feelings are interpreted as factual. In practical terms, this means they fit the facts to their feelings rather than reacting emotionally to the facts. To put that into perspective, most people don't get upset until something happens or is done to them. Narcissists are already upset, and because of that, they become convinced that something must have been done to them to cause those feelings. This happens partly because narcissistic people are so divorced and separated from their feelings through years of denying and avoiding them that they can experience their feelings as coming from somewhere outside themselves. This is why they'll say things like, "I know you hate me, I can feel it." And you're sitting there like, okay, well, you're not getting that from me because I don't hate you. That's their self-loathing, their own self-hatred that they feel. In other words, in these situations, they don't recognize that these feelings were already there and they're not even related to the situation at hand. They become triggered and offended or hurt so easily that the feelings they already feel break through at the slightest provocation, and then they blame the other person for causing them to feel the way they already felt but have been denying. For example, if you say, "Why didn't you wash the dishes?" the shame that the narcissistic person already feels breaks through their denial. This can cause them to lash out at you angrily in self-defense, accusing you of trying to hurt them, to make them feel bad, of demeaning or degrading them, or any number of other things, not because of what actually happened or what was actually said, but because of that shame that they're constantly carrying around. This can be very hurtful and stressful to a partner or a family member who in no way meant anything like that and certainly was not trying to be mean. And now there's no reasoning with the narcissist because they are far too upset. They will not listen to anything other than what their feelings are telling them. Proof doesn't matter, logic doesn't matter, nothing matters except for their feelings. It's like dealing with a little kid. In some ways, although I certainly understand why people feel this way, it's almost weird for me to hear narcissists described as these apex predators. These are some seriously fragile people. They can't live in reality. They can't face the truth. They live every single day playing pretend like a child. They feel hurt and offended and attacked by almost everything anybody says or does, sometimes even things that are complimentary or kind. And why? Because their feelings dictate their reality instead of the other way around, and they seem to have no way to recognize that this is a problem. Most people operate like, you said something mean, therefore I'm upset and angry. Narcissists operate like, I'm upset and angry, therefore you said something mean. It's backwards. Events, actions, and things that are said are interpreted through the lens of the narcissist's feelings. Because of this, events, actions, and motives will often be reframed to fit the narcissist's emotional narrative. Seen through the lens of this emotion, things that happen or that other people do and say often become much more sinister, suspicious, and personal to the narcissist than they actually are. This is one reason why people are often accused of having motives they don't have, or of saying and doing things that they did not say or do. This is also one of the big reasons it's impossible to reason with pathologically narcissistic people, especially when they're upset. They can't even really hear what you're trying to say, and even if they could, they're certainly not going to trust you over their own feelings, which override literally everything. Sometimes they can't even get what they are trying to say to come out right. Narcissistic people have immense difficulty communicating with any authenticity because everything coming in and going out has to go through that emotional filter. More than that, since their feelings are interpreted as factual, those feelings are considered evidence. This must be true because I feel it. The proof that you were intentionally trying to hurt me is that I feel hurt. The proof that you are tricking me is that I feel tricked. The proof that you are cheating is that I feel like I've been cheated on, and so on and so on and so on. There's no way to communicate in this situation because the premise of the conversation and the issue are illogical. It's you trying to talk this person out of their feelings they often had no logical basis for in the first place. Not only is that not possible, but it can make the narcissist feel as if you're trying to manipulate them. Narcissistic people have huge issues with trust. They don't even trust themselves, so they're generally in a constant battle between trying to determine what is safe and what is not safe. One moment they trust you more than themselves, so you're a safe place. The next moment they trust themselves more than you, so now you are not a safe place. In situations such as our example about the dishes, if they were to believe you over their own feelings, that makes them vulnerable to you and whatever evil things that you're probably going to do to them at some point, possibly, maybe, they're for sure. That can't be allowed to happen, and it won't be allowed to happen. Even tangible, physical proof does not matter to them in these situations. They are so worried about being tricked and about not being wrong that they can appear almost delusional. So you say, yes, but here's a video of what actually happened. Oh, you edited that to make me look bad or to make yourself look better. Yes, but here's a picture of you doing this thing that you said you didn't do. You faked that to make me look like a liar. Yes, but here's a message in your own words. You wrote that and sent it to yourself to frame me. There's no reasoning with this. It's illogical and it's ridiculous. The overwhelming emotions coupled with their fear of being vulnerable and taken advantage of, along with their pathological need to be right, or more precisely, not to be wrong, make communication with this kind of person impossible. You are not on a level playing field at all. Whether they realize how absurd their arguments can be is a difficult question. Some probably do, but they might feel they've gone too far with it to simply just give in, no matter how stupid it sounds. Others may be in the grip of whatever emotion they're feeling and just running off at the mouth without even really realizing what they're even saying. Some may believe that they're smarter than the person they're arguing with and can somehow make these ludicrous arguments work, while others may be making these nonsensical arguments because that's literally the only thing they have left to say. It doesn't really matter whether they know they're doing it or not, or why they're doing it or anything else. It isn't possible to communicate with someone who cannot or will not listen to you, and it doesn't really matter why. The naked truth is that even if you could make them hear you, they still wouldn't care. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via email, via text messenger, and through Skype. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to go ahead and do that. I teach workshops a few times a month. We have the Boundaries Workshop and the Shadow Workshop running right now. So if you're interested in learning more about that or signing up to participate, you can do that on littleshaman.org as well. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about the narcissistic person's need to win. This is something that virtually everybody encounters when dealing with pathologically narcissistic people, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. You might have noticed that narcissistic people have a problem with losing. They're almost phobic about it. They will do anything to win, including lie, cheat, steal, and even kill in some cases. Everything becomes a competition where they have to somehow come out on top, even basic conversation or situations where others agree with them. They have a huge problem with admitting and accepting that they're wrong or mistaken, and they will often go as far as possible to deny facts, proof, or anything that contradicts what they're claiming, even if this means they have to venture into arguments that sound delusional or make total fools of themselves. Conversations with pathologically narcissistic people can resemble high-stakes debates or prosecutions in a court of law where people are grilled relentlessly over minor details or become lost in semantics and word salad. What was said, explaining what was meant by what was said, tone, inflection, word choice, motive, and much more become the focal point of the interaction instead of whatever the actual point of the conversation was. The point itself is, of course, hopelessly lost, buried under the 2 tons of crap that the narcissist has heaped upon it in the hope of never having to face, acknowledge, or resolve anything. They don't want resolution. They want conflict. Every conversation, every argument, every interaction becomes a contest that they must win at all costs. This is extremely frustrating for people. The goal of communication for most people is to understand, to be understood, to resolve conflict, to gain knowledge, to solve problems, to share. None of these things are possible with pathologically narcissistic people because nothing they're saying is genuine in the sense that most other people understand things to be genuine. After a while, you realize that even when you're not arguing, they're just playing you. They're trying to win this contest they've created in their mind, and whatever they have to do or say in order for that to happen is what they will do or say. This is why people become so exhausted from these interactions and why the narcissist doesn't become exhausted. They're getting supply and a rush from the competition, from the promise of a win. They're chasing that rush. They're playing a game just like someone who's gambling. It's very similar, in fact, to gambling. The other person has a completely different goal than the narcissist. They're desperately trying to be heard and solve a problem. They're choosing what to say very carefully. They're focusing intently. They're concentrating. This is exhausting. And narcissists sit there soaking it all up and pulling on the arm of that emotional slot machine they're playing with, hoping this time the other person retreats and they can come up with that jackpot win. Even if you're not fighting with the narcissist and just trying to hold a conversation, they're often contradicting, one-upping, condescending, bluffing, preaching, sermonizing, correcting, complaining, and confabulating. This is exhausting as well. You may feel like you're always defending, even during seemingly regular conversation and even when the narcissist is not angry. Because of these things, it's important to understand that it's basically pointless to bother trying to reason with someone who's pathologically narcissistic. All they care about is winning. If they're wrong, if they're mistaken, if they're flawed, if they lose, then they're not perfect. Narcissists believe if anyone, including themselves, is not perfect, that person is worthless. In order to be perfect, a person must be always right, always flawless, always important, they must never fail, and they must never lose. The act of being wrong, of losing, often triggers a tidal wave of shame and self-hatred for pathologically narcissistic people. To be wrong is to be imperfect. To be imperfect is to be garbage, unworthy of love or anything else. The only way they can counteract or prevent these feelings is to make sure they're never wrong and they never lose. Of course, this is ridiculous and unreasonable, and it's one of the reasons dealing with pathologically narcissistic people is so difficult. No one's perfect. No one is flawless. No one is always right. No one always wins. Dealing with a person who's trying to force you into living that delusion as a reality is torturous, and ultimately it's impossible. Somebody has to be to blame when the narcissistic person is inevitably wrong, mistaken, or flawed, and if it can't be them, it's going to be whoever's convenient. That's you. After all, you can't be right unless somebody else is wrong. You cannot win unless somebody else loses. These are people who have nothing of their own. Narcissists have nothing of their own. Anything they get must come at the expense of somebody else. Always. The knowledge that narcissistic people need to win is really, really important because it helps you to understand what the stakes are during every single interaction with this type of person. This is someone who too often takes even a simple conversation as a contest they must win in order to prove to the world and to themselves that they deserve to live. This type of thing is the only way they can create self-worth. It's the only power they are capable of grasping. It keeps the self-hatred away. It validates their existence. It sustains them. In other words, this need to win is really, really important, and it is not going away. This is how they have learned to deal with life and get their needs met. Remember that when you're dealing with someone that you believe is pathologically narcissistic, they're not working towards resolving problems. In fact, what you believe to be the problem is probably not anywhere close to what they think it is. Their way of thinking is not your way of thinking. Their goals are not your goals. Their motives are not your motives. This is a person who, in some ways, operates completely differently than you do. Attempting to deal with a narcissist without truly accepting and understanding this only leads to problems. Reality needs to be accepted here, otherwise expectations are going to be unrealistic, and that leads to hurt, disappointment, and unhappiness. If narcissists need to win so badly, and the only way they can win is if you lose, perhaps the best decision is simply not to play. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, through text, via email, so if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the Book an Appointment tab to go ahead and do that, or you can use the link that's available in the information section of this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about the 3 reasons narcissistic people discard others. This comes up in most people's relationships eventually, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. If you've been trying to learn about narcissism, you've probably already heard about the dreaded discard. You may have even experienced it. To discard something means to throw it away, and discard is usually the final stage of the relationship with a pathologically narcissistic person. There are 3 stages in these relationships. The first stage is idealization, where the other person is idealized by the narcissist as perfect and amazing and wonderful, a soulmate, a kindred spirit, the only one who understands. This lasts for varying periods of time and is usually characterized by love bombing, which is exactly what it sounds like. The victim is bombarded with affection, concern, and all of the things that they believe they're looking for in a relationship. This stage is usually intense and moves very quickly. People feel swept off their feet, and though they might notice red flags in this stage of the relationship, they're more likely to ignore them or try to explain them away, because the rest of it is just so wonderful and amazing. The second stage of the relationship is the devaluation stage. This is when the honeymoon is over. No longer perfect in the eyes of the narcissist, the other person now finds themselves to be the target of the narcissist's rage or condescension, frustration, fear, hysteria, or varying other types of abuse. The devaluation stage often starts slowly, getting worse and worse over time until the person finds they can now do nothing right. Everything they say is wrong. Everything they do is bad. All their motives are evil. All their feelings are hateful when their feelings matter at all. The perfect partner has now become a perfect nightmare, and the person just can't figure out what's gone wrong. Adding to the confusion is the fact that most relationships with pathologically narcissistic people swing back and forth between idealization and devaluation. One minute you're the greatest thing that ever happened to them, and the next minute you've ruined their life. If you throw in a few epiphanies, which are those moments where the narcissist seems to suddenly see the light and realize everything they've done wrong, and it's no wonder people are so confused and unsettled by these relationships. The alternating between idealization and devaluation can go on for years, often with the idealization stage becoming shorter and shorter until the relationship is nothing but nonstop abuse and problems almost every day. The narcissist is combative all the time, accusatory, aggressive, provocative, and nasty, or maybe they're silent and cold, ignoring the other person completely except for when they want something. There may be a break in the devaluation when the narcissist feels insecure or when they want something, but mostly the relationship is abusive and invalidating. There is no set time limit for how long this can go on. In some situations, it ends in discard within 6 months, and in some, it can go on for like 30 years. When discard does occur, it's usually for one of three reasons. Number one, the cycles and the victim have ultimately become so boring to the narcissist that they don't care to engage anymore. Number two, the victim is so burned out and emotionally bankrupt that they no longer react to the narcissist's endless provocations, which causes the narcissist to lose interest. Or number three, the narcissist has found a new source that isn't wise to their scam yet. When the cycles or the victim have become boring, narcissists will likely look for something else to stimulate them. This could be new people, new situations, new drugs, or anything else that will light up their dials. The same old arguments or control over the same old person or people just isn't satisfying anymore. It may be that they've broken the person down so completely there's no challenge. Or conversely, that they've never been able to assert control over the person and have decided that it's not worth bothering anymore. Many narcissists are a paradox in that regard. They would like somebody to be submissive and easy to control, yet they often lose interest when that happens. In this same way, if a person will not knuckle under at all, they can lose interest in that as well because they're not getting what they want. If the person becomes so emotionally bankrupt and burned out that they're no longer able to react the way that the narcissistic person wants them to, this can also result in the narcissist losing interest. This happens all the time. You can only listen to the same hysteria and threats for so long before it just stops upsetting you. Your body cannot stay in such a heightened state. It gets burned out and stops reacting. When this happens, it's often taken by the narcissist as a sign that someone no longer cares for them and that they're not important to the person or in the situation any longer. They want people to react to them, to their tantrums, to their provocations, their silent treatments, their nasty little comments. They use this to gauge how much they matter. If someone stops reacting, a pathologically narcissistic person will often take that to mean that they no longer have any power or control in this situation and are no longer important. They would then be more likely to seek out a situation where they can feel those things again. Regardless of how bored or unimportant the narcissist feels in their current situation, however, they are unlikely to leave it if they don't have a new one lined up. Narcissists use other people as resources to obtain attention or energy from them, which is often called supply, that they can then process into self-worth because they have no way to create or sustain that on their own. This is absolutely vital to their survival. Narcissistic people that are cut off from supply bottom out and decompensate, often becoming suicidal or breaking from reality and becoming psychotic. Because of this, bad or weak supply is better than none at all, so they are unlikely to leave without a new resource. Now, sometimes, even if the relationship has not gotten boring, a narcissist will jump ship for a new source of supply simply because the new one is not tainted by imperfect opinions of them. Once the initial perfect idealization stage of the relationship has ended and devaluation has begun, when the honeymoon is over, in other words, narcissists may jump at the chance to gain supply from a new perfect source. Not only does the old source of supply see the narcissist as flawed and no longer perfect, the narcissist sees the source of supply as flawed as well. In a relationship with somebody other than a narcissist, this would be fine. It happens all the time. It's normal, it's natural. But for narcissistic people, it's intolerable. A new person or people who have no previous experience with the narcissist and therefore no negative ideas about them is seen as ideal, just as the victim was initially seen as ideal. The narcissist will likely eventually destroy this new relationship or situation too, as they do with all the others in their life. But until that happens, they would prefer untainted, perfect supply over any other. That's why the supply of strangers is often more important than the supply of the narcissist family. Those strangers know nothing about the narcissistic person, and therefore they have no bad ideas about them. The supply that comes from strangers is more pure than the supply coming from people that know who and what the narcissist really is. It supports the false self that they project onto the world because these people have no way to know the truth. Regardless of the reasons they give, the truth is that pathologically narcissistic people only have relationships in order to gain this attention or this energy that they can process into self-worth. There's no other reason. They're not interested in companionship or friendship for its own sake, and they could care less about the needs of other people. Therefore, if the supply runs out, their interest in the relationship runs out too. Sometimes people try to be the perfect supply in the hopes of keeping the relationship going, but they soon find out that there is no such thing as that. Part of the reason you're in the relationship at all is so that you can be the scapegoat for everything the narcissist needs to blame on other people so that they can still keep believing in the false persona they project onto the world. As far as they're concerned, they're not mistaken or wrong or incorrect or abusive or stupid. You are. Because of this, you can never be seen as perfect. Ever. If you've been discarded, remember that it has nothing to do with you or who you are, and everything to do with who the narcissist wishes they could be. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via email, via text. If you're interested in speaking with me, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the book an appointment tab to go ahead and do that. I am now giving workshops once a month, so if you would like to check those out, you can also visit littleshaman.org to do that, or you can use the link that's available in the information section of this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about the motivations of pathologically narcissistic people. This is something many people wonder about, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. The behavior of narcissistic people can be very confusing. This is often because it's hard to figure out why they're doing things. When asked, their stories often make no sense at all. They may give reasons that blame others, that seem to confuse cause and effect, that misrepresent the order of events, or just plain make no sense. Part of this is because many narcissists don't want to reveal their true motivations. They fear showing vulnerability or how their true motivations will make them look to other people. It also can be because they're often so disconnected from themselves internally and so lacking in insight that they don't really know why they're doing something. They just do what they think they need to or want to do in that specific moment. They may truly not realize why, and most don't understand or care about long-term consequences. It doesn't matter if it'll hurt them later. What matters is now. That is because pathologically narcissistic people are in survival mode, as we've discussed in other episodes of the show. When someone is in survival mode, they can't worry about what will happen tomorrow. They're too worried about getting through today. This is probably the number one motivation of narcissistic people: survival. All their other motives seem to spring from this one. All of their behaviors center around this one thing. You may hear people say, for example, that the motives of narcissistic people are power and control, and that's true. But why? Why do they believe they need power and control? It's easy to stop right there and say, that's the end, and in practical terms, that's all you need to know to decide whether you want somebody in your life or not. However, it's not the end of the story as far as understanding goes. Desiring power and control is not its own endgame, regardless of the mechanics of achieving it. No matter what, there's always the question of why. There's a reason this has become such a powerful motivation in somebody's life. The answer in this case is survival. Pathologically narcissistic people are dependent on others, literally. Because of their disordered functioning, they require the participation of other people in order to function as efficiently as they are able to. When someone is dependent on others, those others have a lot of power and they become very important. This is, for example, how relationships works between adults and children. Children are dependent on their parents and other caregivers for survival. The caregivers are very important to the child because of this, and they have total control over the relationships. This is the situation narcissistic people seem to be in as well. They resent and fear their perceived lack of power in the situation because not having power means not being able to control other people. That means not getting what you need, which equals a threat to their survival. Seeking to control others facilitates their power over other people, which is really power over themselves and their own continued survival. When you can control the things you need for survival, you have a better chance of surviving and you feel less fear. Because you actually can't truly control other people, nobody can, narcissists are in a continuous power struggle with others to try to bridge this gap and alleviate their anxiety over it. This is why people must perform exactly according to the narcissistic person's wishes or they're going to be punished. When you assert identity, individuality, or sovereignty that separates you from the narcissist, you are demonstrating that they do not control you. If they do not control you, you're a threat because you may not give them what they need. Then what are they supposed to do? They have no other way to get it. It's a survival strategy designed to essentially extort what they need from others because they have no idea how to meet their own needs, no skills with which to do so, and either no ability or no desire to learn new ones. Even in cases where the narcissist is truly sadistic and torturous, the motive underneath is still usually fear, even if it's unconscious or unacknowledged. There's nobody who fears weakness and helplessness more than an abuser. Why do they desire to torture or to be cruel? To feel in control, to feel powerful. Why do they desire to feel powerful? Because they fear they're not. Those who are not in control have no power, and those with no power do not survive. Power can also become an addiction, but all addiction is rooted in survival and defense mechanisms. Despite their behavior, this is the mindset of a very young child who has no true control over themselves or their environment. They perceive others to be the ones with all the power and control over them, so they endeavor to take that back by exerting control over the other person or the other people. It's a system based on backward reasoning that results in them actually reinforcing to themselves that they have no power over and over again. This, of course, only makes the problem worse, not better. Creates a situation where they ultimately feel completely powerless in their own lives unless they play these power games with other people constantly and win. This is what you see with pathologically narcissistic persons. Someone who is unable to feel in control and empowered in their own life unless they're degrading, berating, or otherwise subjugating another person. They can't win unless somebody else loses. They believe other people hold all the power and their lives are a constant struggle to take that power, thereby ensuring their own survival. It's a devastating situation both for them and for anyone unlucky enough to be entangled with them in this pointless power struggle that can never be won by anybody and therefore can never end. Understanding the motivations of narcissistic people can help you get unstuck and break the paralysis brought on by the confusion created by this so often nonsensical behavior. It's easy to get stuck in a loop of trying to understand and trying to explain, never realizing that neither of these things are really going to help facilitate communication at all. The narcissist has one real goal, and if what you're saying or doing doesn't help further that goal, it's getting in the way of it. Therefore, they will either defend against, deflect, deny, or destroy it, all in the fear and the resulting entitled rage that their needs are not going to be met. Now, it can be easy to mistake the narcissist's motivating fear as something which can be addressed with demonstrations of love, security, kindness, or the other normal avenues of reassurance that you would use with another person, but this is not, quote, normal fear. It is a deep pathological insecurity centered around their own inability to perform basic survival functions or secure and address basic needs, which is wrapped in shame and obscured by denial coupled with cognitive distortions and skewed perception. We compare their mindset to children, and in many ways it's very much the same due to their arrested emotional development, but in other ways it's more like dealing with a machine that can only do one thing. At all costs and by any means necessary. I hope this clears. Today I wanted to talk to you about denial in narcissists. It's a very common problem when dealing with narcissistic people, and it's a large part of what drives them, so I thought we'd talk about it on the show today. Narcissists are all different in some ways, but one thing virtually all of them have in common is denial. They operate under a huge amount of denial. It's one of the central functions of the defense mechanism that we know as narcissism. Narcissistic people generally experience large amounts of self-hatred and shame. Their emotions are out of control and disproportionate to the situation a lot of the time, which is usually experienced as frightening or as weakness, which they absolutely loathe. They generally haven't learned how to regulate or control their emotions, so they're not able to soothe themselves when they get upset. The result of this, the reaction to this, is the only defense they have against this ever-boiling cauldron of emotion: denial. This denial is very important. In order to keep the self-hatred and pathological shame that most of them feel at bay, they must combat that. Denial works as far as it goes, but it isn't enough. To simply deny who you are creates a vacuum, because then you're nobody. To counteract that, you have to then create something new to put in its place. That is where the false self comes in. It's a monument to the narcissist denial. It is the counterpart to every negative thing the pathologically narcissistic person secretly believes themselves to be. It is the shining, perfect, beautiful facade designed to keep the ugly hidden one under wraps. Without this facade, they have no armor against the self-hatred and the shame that they feel. It consumes them very quickly if it can break through that facade, and what often follows is decompensation, or what some call collapsing. Collapsing can lead to psychosis and even suicide. It is very serious. This is why penetrating the denial of pathologically narcissistic people is so difficult. It is essential to their very existence. Their coping strategy is set up in such a way that they never have to accept anything that's hurtful or that feels like blame. It does not penetrate the armor. This is why they turn and twist and deflect and project. Imagine those old cartoons where the guy contorts himself into crazy positions using a frying pan to deflect all the bullets back to the shooter. This is what the narcissistic person is doing. However far outside the bounds of reality or credulity they have to go doesn't matter. What matters is deflecting the threat. Any criticism or blame opens a doorway to that barely restrained self-hatred and shame. That's why you see the rage. That's why they feel attacked. It's like a dam that's about to burst. There are cracks in it now, and more water is starting to trickle through. The pathologically narcissistic person can feel that trickle. They can feel the pressure behind the wall, and they're panicking because their denial cannot hold on in the face of facts. What's on the other side of that terrifies them. Denial can be very powerful, but it's also a fragile coping mechanism for pathologically narcissistic people. There's a thin wall between the narcissist and the things they want to escape, and it's fractured pretty easily, probably because they are aware they're hiding something. When this happens, you will often see various types of devaluation: rage, hysterics, suicide attempts, silent treatments, ghosting, and discarding, and more. Not only are these things a warning to the threat to back off, but when you deny something, you make it more powerful. The more afraid you are of something, the more you hide from it, the more power you give it. Imagine how powerful these things are then, considering the sheer amount of time and energy the narcissistic person has put into denying them for their entire life. It probably feels like a monster inside of them, and ironically, that's often exactly how it comes out. Narcissistic people face these threats to their denial constantly because they can't avoid reality completely. They may appear delusional, but they are not psychotic, and even the most clever reframing in the world simply cannot mitigate all the facts all the time. Sometimes some things get through. It's a never-ending battle on their part then to shore up the cracks in the dam so that they don't drown. They are good at it, but contrary to their beliefs, nobody's perfect. When denial of something is no longer possible, often serious depression can occur. They may break down and collapse under the strain. This is often when they will reach out to others with their threats of hurting themselves or feelings of abandonment, rejection, and despair. Because pathologically narcissistic people cannot regulate or create their own self-worth, they have to extract it from other people, usually using the false self. If they cannot use the false self, such as in times of collapse, what you will often see is a heavily filtered version of the true self. A cataclysmically depressed wreck of a person, a child who does not know how to function in this world. It's a sad irony that instead of using this stolen self-worth to actually build true self-worth to engender acceptance of themselves, they use it to rebuild the dam and strengthen their denial. Instead of fixing the problem, they're actually reinforcing it and making it worse. It's perhaps one of the most valuable lessons we can learn from narcissistic people, the importance of living authentically and being honest with ourselves. Yes, accepting things can be painful. However, what we don't accept, we cannot change. And what we deny eventually ends up running our lives. Be honest with yourself and face the struggle. Change is never easy, but it can be so worth it. Honesty is the first step to that. Today I wanted to talk to you about how pathologically narcissistic people are always in survival mode. If you are dealing with a narcissistic person, this is very important to understand, so I thought we could address it on the show today. People often ask why so many pathologically narcissistic people don't seem to think of the long-term consequences of their behavior. While this is a multifaceted answer, part of the reason for that is because they are in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you are not thinking of 2 years from now, or 2 months from now, or even 2 days from now. All you're focusing on is right now. And the crisis happening right now, getting your needs met right now. Consequences are secondary in survival mode. We can't worry about consequences right now because all that matters right now is surviving. If at some point in the future we are no longer in survival mode, maybe we can think about the consequences then. The problem is that doesn't happen. There is no future. There's only now and the endless crisis of need. People dealing with pathologically narcissistic loved ones often feel like they're stuck in Groundhog Day, where it's just the same thing over and over and over again. There's always a problem. There's always a crisis. There's always an emergency. Or conversely, there's never a crisis and never an emergency because the narcissistic person doesn't care about anything at all. The narcissist never seems to get tired of this. It's like they don't even realize it, and it's safe to say they probably don't. To them, it seems that every day is a fresh horror, filled with losses and landmines and the desperate search for self-worth and fulfillment. The focus is on just making it through day-to-day life. This is something that many of them have a huge amount of difficulty with, and their coping mechanisms are primitive at best. This is one reason why they are so results or reward driven no matter what the cost. For a narcissistic person, the ends justify the means. They're just trying to survive. They need what they need, and anyone or anything that gets in their way is expendable. If you were starving and you needed to steal food to eat so that you didn't die, you would do that. You wouldn't care that you were breaking the law, and you wouldn't care about the situation of the person you were stealing it from. In survival mode, all that matters is your own life. This is how they see things. Their mindset is such that they have to do these things to survive, and when someone exists in that mentality, nothing is off limits. The problem is, narcissists are in survival mode, but they are not in a survival situation. There's no competition for resources, no need to fear that their survival is in question, yet they conduct themselves as if these things are true. They behave as if there are nonstop imminent threats to their well-being, especially to their emotional well-being. It's not unlike the particular type of food aggression that we see in dogs that have been neglected and starved. This is not the only cause of food aggression in dogs, of course, but it is a legitimate one. If a dog was in an abusive situation long enough, he will have learned that food resources are not stable or reliable. Food might be available now, but it could become scarce at any time, and this puts the dog's survival in jeopardy. Because of this, he will gobble any food he's given or that he finds as fast as possible, and if someone tries to take the food away, the dog will growl and he will bite in order to protect his resource. This dog is in survival mode. He doesn't know when or if his next meal will ever come, so he feels an urgency and an anxiety about food all the time. He has learned that he cannot trust in a reliable source of food, therefore he secures as much as he can, as fast as he can, and if anyone interferes, even people that he loves, they will be dealt with aggressively. Another dog that tries to eat the food or dares to even come near it will be attacked or maybe even killed. This is how the dog attempts to cope with what he has learned about life. Survival mode takes over so that his needs can be met. He's attempting to protect and secure his resources because he doesn't know if he's ever going to have them again. Humans are not all that different from this. We learn things the same way, and we are imprinted by previous experiences the same way, especially early ones. Narcissists don't know when or if their needs will ever be met, and they believe they are helpless to attend to those needs on their own, so they feel a continuous urgency and an anxiety about their needs all the time. Their constant focus is, what about me? For whatever reason, early on, they seem to have learned that they cannot rely on other people to care about them, and they have compensated for this by focusing exclusively on their own needs, to the exclusion and the detriment of everything else, in the panicked belief that not to do so means these needs will never be met. This results in narcissistic people attaching astronomical importance to their own needs and perceiving any deviation from this as an attack and a rejection. Unable to attend to their own needs, they insist that others attach the same importance to their needs that they do. When this doesn't happen, it reinforces the idea that they are in a fight for their survival. No one will care about me if I don't care about myself. No one will care about my needs if I don't make them care. No one will recognize my needs if I don't force them to recognize my needs. Of course, in a healthy relationship of any kind, this is not necessary. However, the pathologically narcissistic person generally does not recognize this. They are locked into a certain way of being, a certain mode of operation. They know no other way to be, and to abandon that would be tantamount to saying their needs don't matter at all. For most narcissists, the only way they see out of survival mode is death. The idea that there is another way to live is totally foreign to them. It's like if someone was trying to tell you to breathe through your ears. It sounds preposterous, and more than that, it sounds impossible. To the pathologically narcissistic person, it also sounds like a trick. You're trying to get them to stop focusing on their needs so that their needs are not met. Now, it seems easy enough to fix this, right? Just show them that they're not in a survival situation and that they're safe. Poof, survival mode disengaged. But it's not that easy. All facts that support positive interactions with people are either twisted, reframed, or ignored by the narcissist's perception and the way that their mind works. All facts that support negative interaction and threats to survival are maximized, misperceived, and exploited. This is what happens when someone is hyper-focused on their own needs and is unable to focus on anything else. Everything is perceived as being about or to or because of themselves. There's also the matter of being unable to attend to their own needs. This is a cause of huge anxiety and alarm in pathologically narcissistic people. Again, we can look to our example of the abused dog. He cannot secure his own source of nourishment. He must wait for someone to give it to him. If he could get out of his cage, perhaps he could find his own food, but this is beyond his ability. He must simply wait, pathetically at the mercy of other people's whims. It is the same for the pathologically narcissistic person. If they could get out of the, quote, cage of their defense mechanisms and circular logic, perhaps they would realize that they can do things like self-soothe and create self-worth on their own for themselves. But for whatever reason, they cannot get out. They feel that they're like that abused dog, waiting for someone to bring whatever scraps they feel like throwing. And more often than not, in the narcissist perception, no one comes. They are resentful of this, and even more resentful of the fact that they're relying on other people in the first place. The very fact that this has to happen underscores and accentuates their perceived weakness. If you are dealing with a pathologically narcissistic person, remember that you are likely dealing with someone who believes they are in a daily struggle for survival, who believes they are in resource competition with any and everybody around them, and who is mightily resentful of this fact. They believe that everything they do is justified because of these things. When you are just trying to survive, how can you be blamed for anything that you have done? How could you do any differently? And for the narcissistic person, everything leads back to survival. Their manipulations, their lies, their rage, their false self, everything. This is why everything is such a big deal. Even stupid things that appear to have no connection to survival at all are very significant to the pathologically narcissistic person. Every time they are told no or denied anything, it reinforces the idea that they are in this alone and must fight tooth and nail for everything they get against a world that is literally trying to kill them. Every time they are asked to consider another person, it reinforces the idea that they're unimportant and worthless. Every time someone will not buy into their projections and their false image, it reinforces the idea that they are too damaged to be loved or to matter. Small things have huge implications in the mind of the pathologically narcissistic person. The fiction that they depend on is so fragile that even the tiniest thing could upset the whole structure, and down it goes. This is something that represents literal death in the mind of many pathologically narcissistic people, and something they will avoid at all costs. If you are dealing with a narcissistic person, realize that the stakes are very high for them in everything. This is not a game where they can allow any other winner but themselves. If Fox is chasing Rabbit, who's going to run faster? Rabbit, because Fox is only running for his dinner. Rabbit is running for his life. Today I wanted to talk to you about narcissists and jealousy. This is an extremely common issue people have when dealing with pathologically narcissistic persons, so I thought we could address it on the show today. Jealousy is a pretty common thing. It's a natural reaction to low self-esteem or problems with the way a person views themselves. In narcissistic people, this is no different. The difference is in the way the narcissist feels about themselves. If you have slightly low self-esteem, you might be a little jealous in some situations. If you have none at all, you will be extremely jealous in every situation. This is the problem for pathologically narcissistic people. Most of us have been jealous at some point or another. Maybe somebody had something that you wish you had, or maybe your significant other was unfaithful with somebody. It's usually pretty specific for most people, and it often relates to the normal competitiveness that people feel in different situations or relationships. Narcissists, though, are jealous of everybody over everything. Most seem to believe that everyone else has everything they don't, and they are usually extremely envious and resentful of that. For example, a narcissistic mother may be jealous of her daughter because she believes the daughter is prettier, more successful, gets more attention, has better relationships, or any number of other things that the mother is insecure about. However, whereas most people would simply mull over this type of jealousy internally because they are embarrassed of it, the narcissistic mother may actually attempt to sabotage the daughter so that she's no longer perceived as more successful in these areas. To a narcissist, every situation is a competition with other people that they need to win, even when that person is their own child. Narcissistic people believe that it's unfair for others to have things that they don't have. There was a fairly recent case where a woman killed her upstairs neighbors by setting their apartment on fire, killing both them and the 3 children in there with them. She was jealous because they had a happy relationship and she did not. Rather than improve her own life, this undoubtedly narcissistic person chose instead to destroy the happiness and even the very lives of those who she felt had it better than she did. This is a very common theme for narcissistic people. Why should others be happy while they are suffering? These people were killed simply to make this obviously narcissistic person feel better about herself. Their lives meant absolutely nothing to her. They had no value except for how they made her feel. For most people, jealousy means to envy. For pathologically narcissistic people, jealousy often means to destroy. Just like with any other person, jealousy happens because pathologically narcissistic people feel inadequate. The problem is that they feel inadequate in every way about everything, and they believe they are entitled to destroy things or people because of that. Because narcissists cannot create or sustain self-worth, every bit of it has to come from other people, either directly through attention or indirectly through contests where they compare themselves to others and come out the winner. This is a reflexive coping mechanism designed to combat the feelings of pathological self-hatred and shame that pathologically narcissistic people have internalized and often deny. Anytime they are not the winner of these constant contests they create with other people, that self-hatred and shame shows its face, and the narcissist has to take action in order to avoid, deny, or silence it. This is usually when they attempt to neutralize the object they believe is creating the problem for them, the thing they're jealous of. For example, narcissists that are jealous of attention, support, or sympathy others get may engage in smear campaigns designed to ruin that person's good reputation in order to destroy that support, sympathy, or attention. Narcissists jealous of coworkers may set them up to fail, tell lies about them, or endeavor to get them fired. Narcissists that are jealous of another person's possessions may steal these possessions or ruin them. A narcissistic person that is insecure in a relationship may appear jealous by continuously accusing the other person of infidelity and of having interest in other people. They may also attempt to destroy their partner's confidence or control them in an effort to prevent the partner from finding someone else and leaving. As with anyone else, a narcissist's jealousy is an expression of problems with self-worth. It's extreme jealousy compared to most people because their lack of self-worth is extreme compared to most people. Their attempts to destroy, control, or sabotage situations, things, and people they're jealous of, while harmful and even dangerous, are really nothing more than the narcissist saying, "I'm not good enough. I cannot compete in this situation because I am no good." Jealousy in pathologically narcissistic people can also result in projection of these feelings, where in order to cope with their feelings of jealousy, they accuse others of being jealous of them. A narcissist that is jealous of your success may accuse you of being jealous of their efforts or of trying to sabotage them. This happens because they are envious of you, and not only do they believe you would do something like that because they would do something like that, but because feeling jealous of others stems from not feeling good enough, which triggers shame and rage in narcissists. The only way they have to combat that is to create a defensive scenario where they can try to believe other people are jealous of them. I'm not jealous. I'm not weak. I'm not inadequate. You are. You're jealous of how great I am or how great I'm going to be. This is pitiful to some and maddening to others, but as with everything about narcissistic people, you can't take it personally. In the end, it's really not even about you. It's about them and their never-ending quest to validate themselves at the expense of other people. It's important not to get caught in the cycle of trying to help narcissists with their self-worth problems by attempting to prove to them that they're wrong. It makes sense to do that, and with non-narcissistic people it might work, but with pathologically narcissistic people it's usually a waste of time. Regardless of what they say or who they blame, these feelings of self-hatred, shame, and their lack of self-worth are not the result of anything anybody is doing to them now. They have been a part of the narcissist's internal makeup for years and years and years. This is not a situation that can be fixed with reassurance, and you will only exhaust yourself trying. People who have been involved with narcissists for extended periods of time already know there's nothing you can say or do to convince a narcissist of anything. It just doesn't matter. Everything you do will be twisted into proof that validates what they already feel and what they already believe, even if it makes no sense at all. State your truth by all means, but don't exhaust yourself by repeatedly explaining and defending yourself against things that didn't happen, motives you don't have, and emotions you don't feel. There's just no way to prove something to somebody who is unable or unwilling to believe it. Today I wanted to talk to you about the way narcissists act, or rather react. As listeners of the show know, most narcissists are ruled by their emotions. Many people think narcissists don't have emotions. That's not true at all. It's true that most narcissists have no feelings for other people, but it's a misconception to believe this means they have no feelings at all. Emotions, in fact, color everything they see and do, often to the point that their perception of reality is totally distorted. Of course, that makes sense. Emotions are not logical or factual, they're not right or wrong, they just are. Most people realize that, but the majority of narcissists do not. They believe feelings are facts. I feel it, therefore it's true. Because narcissism is characterized as a failure to distinguish the self from the external world, and because they find their own emotions so overwhelming, narcissists often experience their feelings as alien or as coming from somewhere other than themselves. If I feel bad, someone or something must be making me feel bad. This is the crux of how they deal with the world. Most narcissists perceive the world as hostile, threatening, and negative, which is no surprise considering that's the emotional lens they're viewing the world through. Negative emotions like hate, shame, feeling rejected, these are very powerful. People usually react pretty strongly to them, and the narcissist is no different. The difference is that while most people react appropriately to actual events that really happened, narcissists overreact to their own emotions, which they have projected onto other people. This means they are often perceived to be reacting to things that did not even happen. This is very difficult for loved ones to understand because they often can't see what the narcissist is so upset about. To the narcissist, this looks like a denial of reality and of their feelings, and they become angry. The person's actual feelings are not considered here. It's all about the narcissist and how they feel. And it's not that they're choosing to disregard this person's feelings. It's that they don't understand that other people are separate from themselves. They think their feelings are the other person's feelings. It goes like this. The narcissist experiences a feeling that they find extremely unpleasant, like self-hatred. Narcissism is a byproduct of and a defense mechanism against feelings like that. To make this horrible, crippling feeling easier to deal with, the narcissist projects this feeling onto another person. Now, according to the narcissist, it's no longer their feeling, it's the other person's feeling. I don't hate me, you hate me. It's important to remember that this is not really a conscious thing. It's a reflex, like an automatic deflection. It's like how you would react if someone threw a ball at your face. You would try to swat it away from you without even thinking about it. Even though they realize they hate themselves, they usually don't realize they're projecting. Many of them believe their loved ones really do hate them. This is because that's how they feel about themselves. Again, the other person's actual real-life feelings are not considered here. For the narcissist, it's like looking in a mirror. They feel self-hatred, and when they look at another person, they simply see that hatred reflected back to them. So now the narcissist is sitting here with this awful feeling that they believe is coming from this other person. It's painful, it makes them angry, and they react to that. How dare you hate them when they've done nothing wrong? So they attack the other person, both barrels and guns blazing. It may happen during a very minor disagreement or for no reason at all. To the other person, this looks like they're being attacked over nothing. They're like, what the hell is wrong with this person? Why are they upset? What are they even talking about? So they naturally deny it. No, I don't hate you. And the narcissist gets even angrier. They can feel it. They can feel that hatred. Therefore, it must be real. Their feelings wouldn't lie to them, so obviously you are lying to them. The more you deny it, the angrier they become. The more you try to explain, the more they accuse you. For example, let's say your narcissistic loved one has fixed something in the house. Maybe it's dinner, maybe it's the front steps, whatever it is. You thank them and say that they did a good job. They accept your thanks and all is well. However, the next thing you know, the narcissist is claiming you said they did a terrible job, that it was sloppy, that they're an idiot, that it's bad just because they did it. All the things they would accuse you of saying or doing. You know it didn't go like that. So not only are you hurt and angry that they're lying about you and that they apparently think you're such a mean, villainous, terrible person that you would say things like that, but you're angry that something you thought was okay is apparently not okay. There's a large element of betrayal there. The truth is, all that's going on here is the narcissist is projecting their own insecurities and self-hatred onto you. What they feel becomes what you said. They are reacting to their own feelings. It really has nothing to do with you at all. They're obviously not satisfied with the job they did, and they are claiming that that's how you feel. Just about everything they do is a reaction. It may look like an action taken with purpose at first, but in reality, 9 times out of 10, everything they do is simply a reaction to their own internal feelings. I remember a situation where a narcissist was acting out so badly that the police almost had to be called. Apparently the issue was that the narcissist had been beating themselves up all day because they had checked the mail, forgetting that it was a federal holiday and there was no mail. This caused such a chain reaction of bad feelings that the narcissist had a meltdown. Yes, this sounds very stupid. But to the narcissist in that particular situation, it was just more proof of how stupid, useless, worthless, whatever, that they are. They simply cannot take those kinds of feelings, and when something happens to the narcissist that they believe validates these kinds of feelings, they often just explode. Even those who seem calm, cool, and collected are usually struggling with these kinds of feelings all the time. The narcissist has a brutal superego that assaults them with insults and criticism nonstop. Even the calm, cool, and collected ones. They've just learned to hide that for the majority of the time. They are virtually all reacting to their emotions all the time. The exception to this would be psychopaths who have no real emotions at all. It's not just anger either. A narcissist that cheats is reacting to their own feelings of insecurity or their need for attention. A narcissist that physically attacks other people is reacting to their own feelings of impotence and anger or entitlement. Sometimes you can take the wind out of their sails by not reacting to their provocations and calmly saying, those are your feelings. You are apparently upset with yourself because you don't like the way you fixed the front steps or whatever, and you're trying to punish me because you feel bad. Your feelings are your responsibility. I did not say any of that to you. Your feelings are not my feelings. And sometimes this just causes them to rage harder. Denial is a very ugly thing. The purpose of projection is not only to get you to carry these heavy feelings for them, but it's also to get you to attack them in return. This fills the masochistic need for punishment many of them have, as well as validates their self-hatred and their egotistical need to be right, and also it fulfills their need to strike out at somebody so that they can then feel better. They want to fight. They want you to say, yes, that's right, those front steps look like crap, and of course they do because you fixed them and you're a moron. This way they can defend themselves against that and feel better. They may also be looking for you to say, I would never think that. They look great because you're amazing and I love you. They may want both of those things, even though they will believe neither. Sound confusing? Imagine how they feel. They're fighting themselves, a battle with the invisible man. A blind person in a dark room swinging at nobody. The only way to win this game is not to play, because in this game, you're not the other player. You're one of the game pieces. They are playing the game with themselves, and there is no winner. There are only losers. Today I want to talk to you about narcissists and mistakes. It's pretty well known to those who have had to deal with narcissistic people that narcissists don't deal with mistakes very well. Whether you made one or whether they did, there's bound to be a problem over it. But why is it so difficult for them to deal with something that's so common? If you're the one who made the mistake, the narcissist may either be crushed that you're not perfect or overjoyed that you've messed up. Either way, you're going to hear about it. It's not uncommon for pathologically narcissistic people to fly into a rage over very minor mistakes, attacking the other person relentlessly and attempting to annihilate their character for something as small as bringing the wrong item from the store or simple forgetfulness. There can be a few reasons for this. Many times it's because the narcissist doesn't actually believe it's a mistake in the first place. They are sure that you have malicious motives. They are certain you've done this thing on purpose to upset, sabotage, or otherwise harm them. They take it as a personal attack and an offense. And of course, any attack on a narcissist will be avenged. If they do believe that it was unintentional, they may still attack or demean people anyway because it's a chance to make themselves feel better. Any flaw or failure on another person's part is an opportunity to elevate themselves, and many narcissists will jump at that opportunity. Sometimes narcissistic people will attack loved ones for making mistakes because they can't stand the idea that this person is not perfect. Not only do they feel this reflects badly on them, but a narcissist's idea of love is very immature, unrealistic, and idealized. A partner that is not being devalued and discarded is usually being put on a pedestal. When this perfect partner messes up or fails somehow, this crushes the narcissist. They feel betrayed and tricked and horribly let down. It's not unlike the way a child feels when they're forced to see their parents as ordinary humans before they're ready to understand or accept this fall from grace. It's a very traumatic experience, and it usually alters the relationship permanently. And of course, if you are being devalued or have been discarded by the narcissist, then the mistake is just one more thing they can attack you for. Regardless of the reason, narcissists cannot abide mistakes. And if mistakes are difficult to accept from other people, they are intolerable from the narcissists themselves. Everyone who has dealt with a pathological narcissist knows how far they will go not to admit or accept that they've made a mistake. But this denial is a lot more than just not wanting to be wrong. To most people, a simple mistake is usually not that big of a deal. It can be embarrassing depending on the type of mistake, but generally we all understand that everybody makes mistakes. To a narcissist, though, making a mistake, any mistake, is unacceptable. It's unforgivable. Mistakes to the narcissist are the ultimate proof that they are not special or superior, which means that behind the false self, all the horrible, hateful things they secretly believe about themselves are true. They really are worthless. They really are garbage. They really are stupid. This is, of course, ridiculous. Making a mistake means none of those things. But because of the narcissist's delusional shame and pathological self-hatred, it only takes something small to shatter the illusion they're trying to advance, and that tidal wave of bad feelings comes crashing through. Something as small as not remembering the date can be enough to trigger huge feelings of shame. It sounds absurd to most people, but this is the miserable reality that pathologically narcissistic people are living in. This is why they need to blame their mistakes on other people, and why they go so far not to admit that they've made one. They need an out, a way to nullify and invalidate those bad feelings. If they can't do that, the feelings will overwhelm them and they are unable to deal with that. That's pretty much the reason they do everything, actually. Their life is nothing but one long, constant attempt to escape those horrible, overwhelming feelings. It's why they rage, it's why they lie, it's why they manipulate and gaslight, and why they created a false self in the first place. All of their efforts are all geared towards the same thing. Sadly, it's like trying to hold the ocean back with a broom. The facade of the false self is so fragile that even a very small mistake sends the whole thing crashing down. Imagine if your opinion of yourself were so delusionally negative that making a simple mistake could cause you to decompensate or even to become suicidal if you couldn't blame it on somebody else and were forced to acknowledge it. This is their reality. And this is why relationships with pathologically narcissistic people will always be unfair and abusive. They are literally one small mistake away from total disaster all the time. Today I wanted to talk to you about whether narcissistic people know the difference between right and wrong. This is something there seems to be some confusion about, so I wanted to address that on the show today. There's a lot of sympathy and support for people with mental illness, and rightfully so. Mental illness can be devastating. Technically speaking, pathologically narcissistic people are mentally ill. They have distorted thinking, impaired perception, and many emotional problems, along with whatever other comorbid or co-occurring issues they might have, such as substance abuse, depression, and anxiety or eating disorders. There is often debate about whether someone is responsible for their actions or not when they have a mental illness or a disorder. The point of contention is usually whether this person understands the difference between right and wrong and whether or not they're capable of controlling their behavior. This is a summary of how responsibility is determined legally in a court of law. Does someone understand that what they did was wrong, and were they able to control their behavior? In the case of the majority of pathologically narcissistic people, the answer to these questions is yes. Yes, they understand what they've done is generally considered wrong. They don't care. Yes, they can control their behavior. They have chosen not to do so. They will go as far as they feel they can get away with. For example, in a domestic violence situation, it doesn't usually start out with black eyes and broken bones. It starts out with a push or with throwing something at the victim. It starts out with degrading them, with calling them names, things like that. The consequences of this behavior are as yet unknown, so the abuser tests the water to see what will happen. When the victim doesn't end the relationship or impose any real consequences, the abuser becomes bolder and more comfortable with becoming violent. They will just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until either they are hit with serious consequences or the abuser themselves decides it's gone far enough. This could be very far indeed, up to and including the death of the victim. As with any abuse situation, narcissists blame the victim. They say they were provoked, that they were baited, that they were abused themselves. It's a common defense for a narcissistic abuser to imply or even flat out say that they cannot control themselves. And this is not just for physical abuse, it's all types of abuse. This is a way of denying responsibility for their actions by blaming the victim or blaming circumstances or basically anything other than themselves. For example, an abuser that is forced to confront their own abusive behavior may defend their actions by saying they were mad about something someone else did or said, and then they took it out on the victim because they, quote, couldn't help it. Such as a situation where someone who's angry about something that happened at work takes it out on their spouse or their children. It's funny because it seems like they controlled themselves just fine with the person they claim to actually be upset with. They waited until they got to their victim to suddenly become unable to control themselves. It's a crock. It happens because the consequences of attacking the other person are unknown, but they know there will be no consequences for attacking the victim. It's safer to take their anger out on the victim. There's no risk involved. This is how we know that the majority of pathologically narcissistic people can control their behavior, because they do. If they feel they need to control their behavior, they can do it quite well. For instance, if the police are there, or if they're in court, or if there are people around who the narcissist doesn't want to witness their behavior, that behavior will not occur. Except in cases of very severe stress or upset. The abusive behavior of narcissists will generally only happen when they feel comfortable in the idea that they will not be challenged for it or face consequences. There may be some subtle attempts at covert abuse, like maybe trying to embarrass somebody or attempts at manipulation in front of other people, but generally you don't see the blatant abuse that narcissists are known for if they feel they're in a position where they can't get away with it. This is why some people attempt to record the narcissist without their knowledge, because they know they're not going to act that way in front of other people. But does the narcissist know that their behavior is wrong? Well, obviously, if they're trying to hide something, they know somebody's going to think something's wrong with it. Otherwise, why would they bother to hide it? If it's not wrong, and everyone will clearly agree with you that it's not wrong, why are you hiding what you're doing? But what about in the broader sense? Do pathologically narcissistic people understand the difference between right and wrong in the broader sense? Yes, they do. Narcissistic people, in general, are not psychotic. They understand the difference between right and wrong. They just don't think the same rules apply to them. For example, yes, it's wrong to steal. It is not wrong for the narcissist to steal, and you should stop overreacting, okay? Because they really needed that thing that they stole, whatever it was. Yes, okay, it's wrong to hit your spouse. It is not wrong for the narcissist to hit their spouse because it's only wrong to hit a normal spouse, a good spouse that is loving and supportive and perfect, like all the other spouses on earth besides you. It's not wrong to hit an evil, manipulative spouse that's trying to ruin your life and provoke you. Anyone would agree with that. Yes, it's wrong to abuse your children. It's not wrong for the narcissist to abuse their children because what they are doing is not abuse. Abuse is hurting a child that doesn't deserve it. An evil, hateful, disgusting, despicable child like you were was not being abused because you deserved it. Anybody would agree with that. Of course, if they really believed that anyone would agree with that, they wouldn't be so desperate to make sure nobody finds out about it. The truth is, they know their behavior is wrong, and they understand the concept of right and wrong very well. Many of them consider themselves an authority on what's right, what's wrong, what's fair, what's unfair. They can punish other people for a wrongdoing all day long, and they can go on for days, for years, about the many ways they've been wronged in their life. They understand just fine. They just don't think any of it applies to them because they're pretending to be special. It isn't the rules that pathologically narcissistic people don't understand. It's their own self-importance and their overblown fictional view of their place in the world that's the problem. There's always an excuse for them. There's always a justification or a mitigation. There's always a defense and a reason why what they've done is not really wrong. Pretending they can do no wrong is not the same as not knowing what wrong is. Don't let that confuse you. These are two totally different things. Just because someone doesn't seem to believe they personally did anything wrong doesn't mean they don't know the difference between right and wrong at all. It means they don't believe they did anything wrong, and that's all it means. A lot of people seem to be confused on that fact. Just because they don't think they did anything wrong doesn't mean they don't understand right and wrong. It means they believe they are entitled and justified to do those things. That's what it means. Mental illness can be very serious. It can be terrible and tragic, but it is not an excuse to abuse other people. Not when someone understands the difference between right and wrong. It's just not, and that's all there is to it. The only possible exception to this would be if someone is experiencing actual psychosis and literally cannot tell reality from fantasy. Narcissists live in denial and their perception is distorted, but they are not psychotic. They know what they're doing. They just don't care. Today I wanted to talk to you about how narcissism is a defense mechanism. We always hear about narcissistic personality disorder, but what about narcissism with a lowercase n? Narcissism is not a disorder. It's a trait, like a symptom. When someone has a pathological degree of narcissism, meaning an extreme, inflexible amount, then they may be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, or they may not. Someone can have an extreme and inflexible degree of narcissism but not meet the specific criteria for NPD, or they may, but it might not be recognized. This doesn't mean we can't call them a narcissist. NPD is not the only disorder or problem that has elements of narcissism. There are others, and they're not all personality disorders. Even still, contrary to popular belief, a person does not have to be diagnosed with NPD or any disorder to be considered a narcissist. And just because they're not doesn't mean they're not narcissistic. Narcissist is not a diagnosis, and it doesn't need to be. It's a word we use to describe a type of person. So if narcissism is not a disorder, why is it so problematic? Narcissism evolves as a defense mechanism against abuse or neglect most of the time. Let's say there's a child whose parents ignore them most of the time. When the child does try to get attention, the child is spoken to harshly and pushed away. As the child grows up, they become a scapegoat for the parents. The child is blamed, abused, and neglected. The parent says and does horrible things to the child. You were a mistake. I wish you were never born. I hate you. You're worthless. You're stupid. You're ugly. To a child, this is like hearing these things from God. Small children who are not valued by their parents do not value themselves. It would be as if God Himself came down from heaven and told you that you were worth nothing. The child's brain is immature and unable to defend against these words and these feelings. The only thing it can do is deny them and create a different reality for itself, so that's what it does. That's where the delusional beliefs narcissists hold come from, as well as the false self that they create. The false self is the narcissist's defense against these hurtful words and the resulting hateful feelings that they have for themselves. It's the wall they hide behind, the only real defense they have. It's their way of saying, look, I'm not bad, I'm good. I'm not worthless, I'm important. I'm not unwanted, I'm necessary. And most importantly, I'm not weak, I'm strong. This is why it's so important to the narcissist that other people believe in the false self. It's not for them, it's for the narcissist. How can something be untrue if other people believe it? The narcissist has no internal regulation system for their self-worth. Without input from others, it's zero. This is what so-called narcissistic supply is for. This is why they need it. Because of the abuse they suffered, they did not develop the way they were supposed to. Their mind was too preoccupied with simple survival, and as a result, their emotional capabilities are stuck in toddler survival mode. They've never matured or been able to move on. They never learned to deal with loss, control their emotions, handle frustration, or how to soothe themselves. To the narcissist, they're still in the abusive situation, still under attack all the time. And in a way, that's true. Their mind has never resolved the feelings of shame, self-hatred, and worthlessness from when they were really young. They still experience these feelings as if the abuse is going on right now. And the abuse they heard often still plays over and over again in their minds. But now instead of coming from outside, the abuse is coming from inside and has become a constant part of their inner dialogue. This is why they overreact to minor things or misperceive things as intentionally offensive or hurtful. They're not reacting to what's actually happening. They're reacting to that constant internal abuse and self-hatred. Narcissists believe they are defective, disgusting, unlovable, wretched, fundamentally loathsome, as I believe Marilyn Manson called it. That's probably the best phrase to describe the way they see themselves. Every time I try to explain this, I always feel that I'm not using strong enough adjectives, but that's probably pretty close. After all, if your own parents don't love you, you must be pretty despicable, right? This is how narcissists grow up. This is what they grow up believing. And as an aside, a lot of people say that the narcissists they know were not abused, that they were spoiled, and that they were coddled. Indulgence is abuse too. That's why it's called spoiling. When something is spoiled, it's ruined. Indulging, which we commonly call spoiling, ruins the child's potential as a person. When a child is coddled, when they're indulged, protected, given everything they want, a lot of the same things happen to them that happen to children abused in more recognized ways. The child's development does not proceed as it should. They never learn how to handle their emotions, self-soothe, deal with loss or disappointment. They don't know how to deal with frustration, and they learn to connect their worth to the actions of other people. It's the same mindset. If people don't give me what I want, that's because I'm not worth anything. Narcissism is not cruelty or being mean. Narcissism isn't not sharing things. Narcissism is self-centeredness that arises from the failure to distinguish the self from external objects. This means that the narcissist is unable to tell the difference between other people's feelings and their own, or to regulate their own internal emotionality instead of relying on others to do it for them. It's the result of arrested development, and indulgence and spoiling can cause it just as much as other forms of abuse. Now, there are some people that don't seem to have a history of abuse who still seem to be narcissists, and nobody knows why they are the way that they are. Some of them are probably lying, and they really were abused, but some of them really don't have a history of abuse, and nobody knows what causes that. They're doing research on that now, and maybe someday we'll have an answer. But for now, what we do know is that in the overwhelming majority of narcissistic people, there is a history of abuse. Imagine your self-worth truly relying on other people to the point that if they don't do what you want, you wouldn't feel that life was worth living. Imagine having to pretend you're someone else every second of every day and being so afraid that people would find out you are a disgusting thing that's not worthy of love, you would do anything to prevent that from happening. Imagine being unable to provide for your own even basic emotional needs and simply having to suffer until somebody else did it for you. Imagine being unable to see that this is the problem and instead believing that everyone in your life just tortures you and wants you to suffer because they're cruel and abusive and hate your guts. This is why they react the way they do when they don't get what they want. It doesn't matter why they didn't get it in reality. It is perceived as malicious and purposeful withholding, which causes a narcissistic injury. You're not giving me what I want because you hate me and want me to suffer. Which of course really means I think I'm worthless and I'm afraid you think so too. I'm afraid you've figured out that I'm so defective that I don't deserve anything because that's what I believe about myself. Now this is all subconscious, and the narcissist may actually even be unaware of that on the surface. It's experienced by the narcissist as feelings of rage, loss, and rejection. Consciously, they just know they're not getting what they want because of you or because of whoever. A narcissistic injury, for those that don't know, is something that's a threat or offense to their fragile self-worth. We could call it a blow to the ego, and it is, but because of the way narcissists are wired, this phrase really does not describe how severe of an injury this really is. Narcissists interpret it as life-threatening. This is why narcissistic injuries cause narcissistic rage. They literally feel that they are fighting in defense of their very lives. The sustaining of that false self is absolutely imperative to their survival. And narcissistic injuries threaten their perception of the false self. It's one of the reasons why they're so paranoid. If you were living a fake life, you'd be paranoid too. In a way, narcissism is the perfect defense mechanism. There is an excuse for everything, a reason why everything is somebody else's fault. They never have to listen to criticism. They never have to take responsibility. They never have to take the blame. They have justifications for every single thing they do wrong. With narcissistic projection, they can project their painful or uncomfortable emotions and thoughts about themselves onto other people, and then the narcissist doesn't even have to own those. Everything belongs to somebody else. However, because the narcissist is not truly able to separate themselves from the external world, it all still belongs to them. This is endlessly frustrating, like trying to throw a boomerang away. It just keeps coming back. It's sadly ironic that for all their complicated and convoluted machinations designed to defend themselves against all the abuse they believe they're experiencing, they aren't really escaping anything. They can't escape the abuse because even though they don't realize it, it's coming from inside them. They're only providing themselves temporary relief at best, and it comes at the expense of the very thing they need most: validation from other people. The more they blame, abuse, and hurt other people, the worse other people's opinions of them become. Eventually, these people leave, tired of the abuse and tired of the games. Then the narcissist is left alone with the very person they hate the most, themselves. Today I wanted to talk to you about the similarity between narcissists and ambush predators. This is an interesting metaphor, so I thought we could explore it on the show today. If you don't know, ambush predators capture or trap prey by stealth or by strategy. Now, this is typically not conscious, so in other words, it's not something that's planned and plotted and created, but something that is just simply how the predator operates. A crocodile doesn't plan to look like a floating log, nor does he realize that he looks like a floating log. He's just doing what crocodiles do. This is important to remember because for the majority of pathologically narcissistic people, it's the same. They're simply operating the way that they know how. They're doing what works and what has always worked for them to get their needs met. The use of the word predator sometimes carries a negative connotation for people, and some might believe that this word implies malicious intention to cause harm, but a lion doesn't maliciously intend to harm or torture a zebra. They're not thinking of it that way. The zebra's well-being or feelings are not considered. The zebra's life and family are not taken into account. The zebra is assessed as far as how it can be used, and that's it. It's not understood or considered as an individual or even as a living thing, but merely as a food source. Some might argue that humans are capable of malicious intent, whereas animals are not, and perhaps this is so. However, in order to form malicious intent, the prey has to be considered as a separate individual capable of suffering, and the suffering has to register with and matter to the predator. With some high-functioning antisocial personalities, this is undoubtedly the case. But with your garden variety pathologically narcissistic person, it doesn't seem to be. They seem no more truly aware of the suffering of other humans than the lion is of the zebra's suffering, which is to say not at all. What looks like purposeful callous cruelty is often simply indifference, ignorance, and total self-absorption. Don't know, don't care, don't notice, because it's not about me. People may assume that the behavior is malicious because they can't conceive of the fact that someone doesn't understand these things, or because they've told the person how hurt they are. And that makes complete sense, but it should be considered that just because someone is told something, even if they're told repeatedly, it doesn't mean they understand, and it certainly doesn't mean they care. It's important to make sure then that you're not projecting your own qualities onto other people. Just because you would understand or care doesn't mean that somebody else is the same. Even if a pathologically narcissistic person is intellectually aware that someone is hurt or upset because they've been told or because they're seeing demonstrations of emotions, that doesn't mean there's any connection to anything inside them that causes this information to matter emotionally. Often there's not. This is also like the lion, who uses the zebra's expressed suffering only as evidence that it's not dead yet, and therefore she has to keep hanging on. And even after explaining all that, it's not even really the most important thing about this concept. Understanding that others are not considered as anything other than sources of fulfillment is what matters the most here. So why ambush predators? Well, rather than running food down with some kind of amazing speed or overtaking them by brute strength, as other predators might, ambush predators use camouflage, aggressive mimicry, or a trap. The use of aggressive mimicry in particular is applicable here. Aggressive mimicry is where a predator or a parasite mimics a harmless animal in order to mislead their prey or the host that they're feeding off of. This is the opposite of defensive mimicry, where prey animals mimic predators as a form of self-defense, such as when a butterfly's markings resemble the eyes of a predatory bird. If aggressive mimicry is comparable to a wolf in sheep's clothing, a defensive mimic is a sheep in wolf's clothing. Pathologically narcissistic people may employ either of these unconscious strategies at different times. In aggressive mimicry, signals, camouflage, lures, and other strategies are employed in order to create the illusion that the predator is harmless. The promise of sustenance or mating opportunities are often used. A predator using aggressive mimicry, for example, may disguise itself as a willing mate in order to lure prey close to it, or as a more harmless creature than it really is. Pathologically narcissistic people often use mimicry to appear as if they're something other than what they are in order to gain necessary relationships, necessary sustenance, sources of supply. Like all other things that use mimicry, they're doing this in order to survive. Without the validation given to them by others through attention, narcissists cannot sustain any self-worth. Human beings with no self-worth bottom out, and suicide becomes a very real threat. Narcissistic people are in constant danger of bottoming out, so securing a supply of validation is extremely important. This is not necessarily anything they're doing intentionally any more than any other living creature does. It's how they work. They have learned that the only way they can get their needs met is through mimicry and camouflage. They have adapted accordingly, and in most cases it's not a deliberate act any more than the crocodile is intending to look like a floating log. That doesn't mitigate the inherent danger here, and it absolutely does not excuse any abusive behavior, but understanding the mechanics of the motivation helps people understand what they're dealing with so that they can make informed choices. Narcissistic people understand the difference between right and wrong. They just don't think the behavior is wrong for them because, hey, they have to survive. If you had to steal food in order to eat, would it matter to you that stealing was wrong? Probably not all that much, right? Not if you were literally starving. This is the situation that the pathologically narcissistic person finds themselves in, and whatever maladaptive coping mechanisms or behaviors they have grown into are all considered justified under the umbrella of survival. If it's substance abuse, if it's lying, if it's cheating, if it's gaslighting, if it's raging, if it's violence, doesn't matter. Many are in denial that they're doing these things anyway, and if forced to acknowledge any of it, it will be dismissed as inconsequential when compared to the reason why they felt they had to do it in the first place. This is one of the most confusing things for people about narcissism. The behavior looks aggressive to others, but it feels defensive to the narcissist. This results in very, very different narratives about what has transpired in any situation. With the exception of some high-functioning antisocial personalities, virtually all of the behavior of pathologically narcissistic people is reactionary and defensive. The problem is that many times they're actually reacting to their own feelings and their own internal situation rather than anything other people have actually done. Because they're either unwilling or unable to confront that fact, the result is what looks like, and frankly what is, repeated, vicious, unprovoked attacks against other people. This often helps to create the perception that the narcissist is deliberately cruel just for cruelty's sake, and some probably are. However, it's important not to misunderstand what's actually going on here. It's one thing to believe that someone is being mean or cruel just because they want to be, and that that's the sole motivation. That's a really horrible situation, but the danger of that belief is that it's also something a person might believe could possibly be changed if circumstances, feelings, or situations were to change. We hear it all the time. If I could just prove to the narcissist, if I can just show them, if I can make them see, they're going to stop acting this way. However, when it's understood that someone is behaving the way that they are because they view others as sources of sustenance, and therefore they believe their very survival depends on it, that's a different situation. It changes the parameters of the discussion in a very important way. There will always be those who believe that pathologically narcissistic people are intentionally plotting to hurt and scheme and destroy others for fun. Some of them undoubtedly are. But in the end, it doesn't even really matter. What matters is understanding that even at the very least, the best that can be hoped for is that the cruelty isn't really intentional because you just don't matter at all. Today I want to talk to you about how narcissists are like vampires. It might sound funny or a little melodramatic, but the comparison is more appropriate than you might think. After all, what are vampires? Yeah, sure, they're scary things in movies that drink blood and have supernatural strength, but what are they really? They are parasitic beings that need to feed off of a host in order to survive. When they have fed on the host to where it is depleted and can no longer support them, they move on. This is very similar to how a pathological narcissist operates. Vampires need blood in order to survive. The myths and theories about this are various, but many have to do with the fact that they are undead and therefore have no way of making or using their own blood. This is similar to why narcissists must feed off of other people as well. Pathologically narcissistic people live in a world of internal negativity. They have no way to create good feelings of their own. They have no way to validate themselves or build self-esteem. The only way they can counteract their feelings of self-hatred is to create a false self with characteristics they believe to be positive and absorb the positive feelings this false self elicits from people. People may admire, respect, or envy the false self of the narcissist, and though this satisfies the narcissist superficially, it's a poor substitute for real self-esteem and validation because the narcissist knows these things are not earned and that they're based on something that does not exist. Ironically, narcissists often insist that other people are fake in their admiration or support of them. This is because narcissists know that whatever admiration or positive regard they're given is actually for the false self, not them, and therefore it's been tricked out of people rather than given honestly. This causes them to say that people are being fake. It's not a projection exactly, it's more that they're telling on themselves. They're saying, you don't really feel this way about me, but what they mean is, you can't feel this way about the real me because you don't know the real me. In other words, they think people's emotions are a manipulation because these emotions are based on something that's a manipulation in itself. People don't know that, of course, but the narcissist does. When people find out, they withdraw their support and admiration, and the narcissist's negativity has now been validated. They can then claim that they knew it all along, and that it's their trust which has been violated. And they probably really do feel hurt by this discovery and subsequent withdrawal of positive feelings. Narcissists feel deep shame and hatred for who and what they are, and the only way they can try to counteract that is by pretending they have qualities they don't really have in order to feel superficial admiration from others that they know is stolen. It's really a sad situation when you think about it. They also know that the positive qualities themselves that they are portraying are stolen. The false self is a fraud. It's the narcissist's fantasy of what they wish they were, and most of the qualities portrayed are things they admire in others that they have attempted to acquire, so to speak, but were unable to do so. So, like a kid playing dress up, they fake it in order to receive the attention or recognition for these qualities that the people they envy receive. This is another way they're parasitic and like a vampire. Pathologically narcissistic people have little to no identity. They're like water or wax conforming to the shape of whatever container it's put into. They are mimics, imitating the personalities they see and that they admire. Oftentimes, this is someone they actually know, but it can also be a character in a book or a movie or a TV show, a famous person, a great thinker, a philosopher, or anybody else they wish they could be like. Unfortunately, they're usually a pretty pale imitation and they know it. Narcissists are pathologically envious, and they often latch onto people and things in an attempt to, quote, absorb things that they want. For example, if their partner is a great writer, they may read everything the partner writes and then start writing themselves. Their partner might misunderstand this as the narcissist taking an interest in them, but that is not what it is. It's an attempt to absorb some of the partner's talent and, more importantly, the recognition and special status that they believe comes with that talent. However, it's of course not possible to do that, and the narcissist inevitably becomes frustrated, especially because they have no patience to actually learn a skill or wait for results. In their frustration, they may accuse the other person of attempting to sabotage them, of believing they are better than the narcissist, and of being jealous because they secretly know the narcissist is better at writing than they are. In reality, it's the narcissist who feels that way, and very likely it's the narcissist who's trying to sabotage the partner in an attempt to take the real or imagined spotlight away from them. Having failed in their attempt to leech the person's talent away from them, the narcissist may begin to degrade their partner's ability or blatantly sabotage their partner's efforts. These are not people who can be happy for someone else. Everything is a competition, and all they can do is burn with envy that someone has something that they don't. Whatever it is, it becomes a constant reminder to the narcissist of their failure and worthlessness. If they cannot acquire it, they will attempt to ruin it so that nobody has it. They would rather see something destroyed than see it belong to somebody else. The parasitic nature of the pathological narcissist is evident in everything they do. You might notice that you are exhausted after dealing with narcissistic people. There's a reason for that. Narcissists are empty, and so they feed off of other people's energy, their emotions, their drive. They can't survive without doing that, and they need a constant stream of it. Truly, like a vampire, it's a matter of life and death. Narcissists have no way to prop themselves up, no way to soothe themselves, without other people to either feed them positive feelings or carry the load of their negative feelings by taking abuse so that the narcissist can vent their delusional self-hatred, the narcissist will not survive. Decompensation follows, and then possibly even suicide. So they hang on, draining people of their energy and good qualities and their ability to care until there's nothing left. The person stops caring, stops reacting, stops feeding their energy to the narcissist, and with nothing left to take, the narcissist very often loses interest and just moves on. Luckily for you, that's not the end of the story. Without someone constantly depleting you, you can rebuild. Without someone sucking all your life force out every second, you can put it towards your goals, your dreams, and your talents. And remember, there's another thing narcissists have in common with vampires. They have to be invited in. I wanted to talk to you about the similarities between adult narcissists and children. This, of course, is not going to cover every single similarity, but I'm sure you can fill in plenty of the blanks for yourself. There are many similarities between the way adult narcissists think and process things and the way that children do. In fact, in many ways, these processes are virtually identical. This is because narcissists have arrested emotional development. The emotional maturity that most children go through did not occur within the narcissist for whatever reason. Often this reason is abuse or neglect during childhood. These things cause the child to focus intensely on themselves to the exclusion of all other things because their needs are not being met and their emotions are not being validated. This also results in the mind being taken up with trying to defend itself from the abuse. The mind is, in a sense, always playing catch-up, and because of the trauma that it is experiencing, some important developments are skipped, so to speak, or don't happen. The mind becomes locked in a pattern of defensive reaction and emotional perception made up of many different but related facets that matures extremely slowly and is extraordinarily resistant to change. We call this reaction defense pattern malignant narcissism. In children, these things are normal. In adults, they are evidence of disorder. Young children and babies are not capable of understanding the emotions or needs of others. They only know want and need. They have no way of taking care of their own needs, and they can only scream for someone else to do it for them. When the mother is exhausted and deathly ill with a fever and vomiting, and she's been up for 3 days and she simply cannot cope anymore, does the baby sympathize with this? Does the baby stop crying? No. The baby does not recognize this. The baby does not care because the baby cannot care. They can only keep screaming out their needs regardless of the mother's suffering. This is, in essence, what you are dealing with when it comes to narcissists. For the most part, narcissists do not recognize, understand, or consider other people's needs. They see only their own and their inability to meet them. The more damaged the narcissist is, the more narcissistic they will be, the more immature they will be, and the more childish their way of thinking. And this is not childish as in silly, this is immature and childish as in the emotional maturity and understanding of a toddler. For example, besides the hysterical tantrum behavior we see in many narcissists that is very clearly on par with a young child, narcissists often believe they are immune to the things that happen to, quote, regular people. This is an example of something called magical thinking, which is a phenomenon we commonly see in very young children. A child that makes a wish for a pony may believe that they're going to get a pony. That is what magical thinking is. Narcissists see feelings as facts the way that children do. Narcissists see everything in the world as an extension of themselves, the way that children do, and narcissists believe in their own perceived omnipresence and immortality as children do. They have always been, they will always be. So children believe, and so narcissists believe. The view that they are just another person that must fit into a wider world does not occur to young children. How could it? Rather, they function under the assumption that the world fits around them and that everything they experience or encounter is related to them in some way. This is the same way narcissists see things. They have never matured past this extremely immature way of looking at things. The idea that the world does not revolve around them never occurs to children, as it does not occur to narcissists. This is why they tell you to make sure you talk with your child so that the child does not think that divorce is their fault, because children perceive everything in their world as relating to them, as flowing to them, as flowing from them. For example, children view their parents as only having to do with them and connected only to them, rather than as separate people with their own lives, needs, wants, feelings. Parents are very one-dimensional to young children. Despite the fact that children are only one part of the parent's life, the child does not see this or understand that in any way. To a child, parents only exist as their caretakers. It's the only context that children view parents in, and it's the only context they can understand. This is identical to how narcissists view other people. Outside of the narcissist and the narcissist needs, people don't exist. As children mature, they learn that this viewpoint is not true. They learn to see and appreciate their parents as individuals that are separate from themselves. The development of the narcissist is so arrested that this, coupled with such extreme self-focus, means they are never able to separate themselves as authentic individuals from other people and from the external world in general. Because of this, they often feel acted upon by the world and other people or circumstances, rather than as people who act in the world. In their view, they do not act, but rather react to things that are being done to them. It's as if they never outgrew the idea of themselves as powerless children, unable to take control or ownership of their own lives. They behave as though other people are still responsible for them and their emotions, the way that parents are responsible for a small child. They seem unable to own their own choices or even to recognize that things are choices. And this is also like a child. Narcissists are generally impulsive, irrational, and extremely immature. They are careless, irresponsible, and foolhardy. They don't seem able to consider consequences or think about things before they do them, just like children. When pressed for an answer as to why they've done something, narcissists may seem just as mystified as everybody else. I don't know is a very common answer, and it may be the truth. Narcissists seem to possess very little insight as to why they do things, simply reacting on impulse as we see children do. Like children, narcissists often feel helpless in a world of more powerful, more competent, more knowledgeable adults. That's why they create a false self that is the diametric opposite of that. They want to appear like everybody else. They want to appear powerful, competent, knowledgeable. Whatever they are attempting to appear to be, you can be sure that the reality is the opposite of that. However, this helplessness is also an excuse. It's easier to be a helpless victim. If you're a victim, you can never be blamed. If you're helpless, you can never be forced to take responsibility. Children are not blamed for not controlling themselves or for their choices. Narcissists don't seem to feel they should be either. They don't seem to understand the difference between a child and an adult, and they will actually often say things to that effect. These are mostly things that no mature, self-respecting adult would ever say. They may compare themselves to the children, compete with the children, or complain that their spouse holds double standards because the kids are allowed to get away with things that they're called out for. They don't seem to realize that adults and children are held to different standards or why that should be. For example, the narcissist must be asked repeatedly every single night to bring their plate into the kitchen or throw their clothing in the hamper rather than leaving these things on the ground. Instead of simply doing it, the narcissist responds that little Johnny never does it either, but he doesn't get yelled at. Little Johnny is 7. The narcissist is 40 and is one of little Johnny's parents. The discrepancy here is obvious. This is the type of response you would receive from a child that does not want to do their chores, not an adult. An adult shouldn't even need to be told. To the narcissist, however, this is a clear example of favoritism and being attacked solely for who they are. Little Johnny is getting away with the same thing. It does not seem to enter their mind that there is a very large difference between a 7-year-old and a 40-year-old. Regardless of whether or not they actually feel that way, the childishness and absurdity of this argument is really unbelievable. It's almost shocking in its ignorance. There is not only the complete refusal to behave as an adult, there is an inability to even understand why this would be expected. The truth is, underneath all the horrible things they do, underneath all of the expectations of special treatment and everything else, the narcissist is still that 5-year-old child pretending they're somebody else to escape an abusive situation that ended years ago. When all their reasoning is examined, when all their behavior is scrutinized and looked at through the lens of perspective rather than pain, this is what we're left with. A person with the emotional maturity of a toddler who cannot understand why they're expected to behave otherwise and who is trying desperately to pretend that they're somebody else. All of their attention seeking, all of their manipulations, all the gaslighting, smear campaigns, all of their abuse, all of the hurtful things they do, when seen for what these things really are, they're nothing but childish behaviors that have been perpetrated by an adult. every single one of these things is seen in children. Gaslighting is a 3-year-old with chocolate all over his face who is hiding the chocolate bar behind his back in plain sight, saying, "What chocolate, Mommy? I don't have chocolate. I wasn't eating chocolate." Smear campaigns are a 6-year-old telling lies about a girl to that girl's friends so they won't like her anymore. They can all be compared to the behaviors of children. Though these behaviors are sometimes seen as sophisticated schemes, they really aren't. They are the same childish and petty things we all dealt with on the elementary school playground. They're just more confusing and therefore more dangerous because they're coming from an adult. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something very important regarding pathologically narcissistic people, and that is that for all intents and purposes, narcissists are emotionally disabled. In fact, some even receive Social Security disability because they're unable to work due to the problems they have regarding their personality disorders. The definition of disabled is having a physical or mental condition that limits movement, sense, or activities. This absolutely applies to pathologically narcissistic people. While their intellectual and physical capabilities are usually not impacted, their emotional abilities are seriously affected. These are people who have the emotional capabilities and understanding of a toddler, or maybe an even younger child. They are either totally possessed by their emotions or so divorced from them that they seem to have none at all. Underneath, emotion controls everything pathologically narcissistic people do, but because they have such limited understanding of and sometimes attachment to their emotions, they may not even be aware of this at all. You will often find that, along with the usual emotional dysregulation we see with narcissistic people, they also cannot articulate their emotions to others, and they have very little to no understanding of how other people are feeling at all. This is also very like a young child. Pathologically narcissistic people have arrested emotional development. If you met an adult who had the physical capabilities of a toddler, you would be able to understand that right away. If you met an adult with the intellectual capabilities of a toddler, you would recognize that right away as well. But when someone has the physical appearance and the intellectual capabilities of a grown person, it can be very hard to understand or even see the amount of emotional difficulty that they're having. You may not see it at all until this person becomes upset. This is especially true because they have evolved within their dysfunction to compensate for it in some ways. They've had to in order to survive. Imagine a 2-year-old just left on the street to fend for themselves. They would either die or they would learn. Narcissists have learned. They've learned to mimic. They've learned to manipulate. They've learned to try to compensate intellectually for the emotional difficulties that they're having and to rationalize the decisions they're making based on this dysfunctional process. In other words, instead of growing out of their dysfunction, they have grown into it. It can help to look at pathologically narcissistic people as disabled because the frank truth of it is they are. If someone is pathologically narcissistic, they are usually affected pretty severely by narcissism in most areas of their life. They will often have a lot of trouble with jobs, with authority figures, with relationships of any kind, and just generally with life. We often find that the way they perceive things is not how they really are, and that in general, their mindset and way of thinking is simply not conducive with social situations or with the way that life actually works. There are some pathologically narcissistic people who are able to function well in some areas of their life, but we will usually see problems because of narcissism in at least one major area of their lives, and these problems are usually pretty severe. For example, a narcissist may do very well at their job, but have extremely serious problems with interpersonal relationships. They often have problems with addiction and impulse control as well. One thing it's important to remember, though, is that pathologically narcissistic people know right from wrong. They understand that the things they're doing would be considered wrong, at least by other people, if not themselves, and that's one reason they attempt to hide these things. They're able to control their behavior as well. Some people have trouble believing that, but ask yourself if the behavior has ever occurred in a place where the narcissist knew they could not get away with that. The answer is almost always no. We should, therefore, not consider pathologically narcissistic people disabled and unable to help their behavior. How we should consider them is disabled and unwilling to make any of the changes in their lives that are necessary to deal with their disability. If someone has lost the use of their legs, they learn to use a wheelchair. They make whatever renovations to their home and modifications to their vehicle that are necessary in order to accommodate their disability. They don't insist that somebody else carry them everywhere for the rest of their lives. If someone has lost their sight, they learn to memorize the layout of their house. They learn to count their steps so they know how to get where they're going and back. They learn to use their other senses to help guide them. They don't insist that someone else do everything for them. This is what pathologically narcissistic people are doing. They are making their disability everyone else's problem, while at the same time insisting they don't even have one. They insist everyone make all these allowances and special rules for them and their unacknowledged disability, while at the same time claiming they're not the ones with the problem. Even though pathologically narcissistic people are emotionally disabled in pretty much every way it's possible to be, there are things they could do to make living with that and navigating their lives easier. Their problems are not going to go away, but they can often be managed differently. The right medication can help. Learning new skills to help with emotional reactivity, such as reality testing, and creating new coping mechanisms can help. Learning to sit with and process emotions can help. There are many things they could do to take a proactive approach to dealing with this problem. Even small things such as cutting down on sugar and caffeine intake, or eating better food and getting more sleep. It won't cure their narcissism, but it can help with managing their behavior. However, most of them refuse to even acknowledge that there's a problem at all in any real way, so nothing ever changes. And make no mistake, it is a refusal, because inside of themselves, they generally know that something is wrong. They may even admit this or make allusions to it. Facing this head on is not impossible for them, but it can be extremely unpleasant and frightening, so they simply refuse to do it. They continue to go through life without the ability to walk, insisting that others need to carry them. There's no way to help a person who does not want to help themselves, and excusing their behavior or rescuing them only makes the problem worse. If narcissistic people refuse to do the things they could do in order to manage a problem, there's nothing anyone else can do. It is not up to everyone else in this person's life to make changes and accommodations and allowances for them when they won't even do the bare minimum for themselves. All you can do is make sure you understand the situation so that you can be sure you are not making things worse on yourself. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something that is very common in relationships of any kind with pathologically narcissistic people, and that is the fact that they don't listen. And sometimes they can even seem to be incapable of hearing you. You might notice that when you speak to a pathologically narcissistic person, though they seem to be listening and they're often even looking right at you, they then respond with something that has nothing to do with what you just said, or they only seem to hear one part of what you said and somehow manage to come to the exact wrong or opposite conclusion of your words. This is often a huge problem in these kind of relationships, and it is especially bad when the narcissistic person is upset. How upset they are often dictates how much they're able to listen, and if they're too upset, it may be totally useless to even bother talking to this person because they just cannot hear you. Many people think this is deliberate, and for some pathologically narcissistic people, it's probably true. But it also happens because their feelings are so overwhelming to them that that wave of emotion simply blocks everything else out. It can seem like they're changing the subject with their responses to you, or that they're ignoring you, and maybe they are. But often it seems that they're not even hearing you. After dealing with this for a while, you may even be able to recognize the look in their eyes when they're no longer listening to you. They seem to be listening to somebody else talking that only they can hear, and in a way they are. They're listening to the raving, screeching voice of their own feelings. For a pathologically narcissistic person, feelings are facts. Instead of being able to view their feelings objectively as temporary reactions that may or may not be logical, their feelings are interpreted as factual. In practical terms, this means they fit the facts to their feelings rather than reacting emotionally to the facts. To put that into perspective, most people don't get upset until something happens or is done to them. Narcissists are already upset, and because of that, they become convinced that something must have been done to them to cause those feelings. This happens partly because narcissistic people are so divorced and separated from their feelings through years of denying and avoiding them that they can experience their feelings as coming from somewhere outside themselves. This is why they'll say things like, I know you hate me, I can feel it. And you're sitting there like, okay, well, you're not getting that from me because I don't hate you. That's their self-loathing, their own self-hatred that they feel. In other words, in these situations, they don't recognize that these feelings were already there and they're not even related to the situation at hand. They become triggered and offended or hurt so easily that the feelings they already feel break through at the slightest provocation, and then they blame the other person for causing them to feel the way they already felt but have been denying. For example, if you say, "Why didn't you wash the dishes?" the shame that the narcissistic person already feels breaks through their denial. This can cause them to lash out at you angrily in self-defense, accusing you of trying to hurt them, to make them feel bad, of demeaning or degrading them, or any number of other things, not because of what actually happened or what was actually said, but because of that shame that they're constantly carrying around. This can be very hurtful and stressful to a partner or a family member who in no way meant anything like that and certainly was not trying to be mean. And now there's no reasoning with the narcissist because they are far too upset. They will not listen to anything other than what their feelings are telling them. Proof doesn't matter. Logic doesn't matter. Nothing matters except for their feelings. It's like dealing with a little kid. In some ways, although I certainly understand why people feel this way, it's almost weird for me to hear narcissists described as these apex predators. These are some seriously fragile people. They can't live in reality. They can't face the truth. They live every single day playing pretend like a child. They feel hurt and offended and attacked by almost everything anybody says or does, sometimes even things that are complimentary or kind. And why? Because their feelings dictate their reality instead of the other way around, and they seem to have no way to recognize that this is a problem. Most people operate like, you said something mean, therefore I'm upset and angry. Narcissists operate like, I'm upset and angry, therefore you said something mean. It's backwards. Events, actions, and things that are said are interpreted through the lens of the narcissist's feelings. Because of this, events, actions, and motives will often be reframed to fit the narcissist's emotional narrative. Seen through the lens of this emotion, things that happen or that other people do and say often become much more sinister, suspicious, and personal to the narcissist than they actually are. This is one reason why people are often accused of having motives they don't have, or of saying and doing things that they did not say or do. This is also one of the big reasons it's impossible to reason with pathologically narcissistic people, especially when they're upset. They can't even really hear what you're trying to say, and even if they could, they're certainly not going to trust you over their own feelings, which override literally everything. Sometimes they can't even get what they are trying to say to come out right. Narcissistic people have immense difficulty communicating with any authenticity because everything coming in and going out has to go through that emotional filter. More than that, since their feelings are interpreted as factual, those feelings are considered evidence. This must be true because I feel it. The proof that you were intentionally trying to hurt me is that I feel hurt. The proof that you are tricking me is that I feel tricked. The proof that you are cheating is that I feel like I've been cheated on, and so on and so on and so on. There's no way to communicate in this situation because the premise of the conversation and the issue are illogical. It's you trying to talk this person out of their feelings they often had no logical basis for in the first place. Not only is that not possible, but it can make the narcissist feel as if you're trying to manipulate them. Narcissistic people have huge issues with trust. They don't even trust themselves, so they're generally in a constant battle between trying to determine what is safe and what is not safe. One moment they trust you more than themselves, so you're a safe place. The next moment they trust themselves more than you, so now you are not a safe place. In situations such as our example about the dishes, if they were to believe you over their own feelings, that makes them vulnerable to you and whatever evil things that you're probably going to do to them at some point, possibly, maybe, they're for sure. That can't be allowed to happen, and it won't be allowed to happen. Even tangible, physical proof does not matter to them in these situations. They are so worried about being tricked and about not being wrong that they can appear almost delusional. So you say, yes, but here's a video of what actually happened. Oh, you edited that to make me look bad or to make yourself look better. Yes, but here's a picture of you doing this thing that you said you didn't do. You faked that to make me look like a liar. Yes, but here's a message in your own words. You wrote that and sent it to yourself to frame me. There's no reasoning with this. It's illogical and it's ridiculous. The overwhelming emotions, coupled with their fear of being vulnerable and taken advantage of, along with their pathological need to be right, or more precisely, not to be wrong, make communication with this kind of person impossible. You are not on a level playing field at all. Whether they realize how absurd their arguments can be is a difficult question. Some probably do, but they might feel they've gone too far with it to simply just give in, no matter how stupid it sounds. Others may be in the grip of whatever emotion they're feeling and just running off at the mouth without even really realizing what they're even saying. Some may believe that they're smarter than the person they're arguing with and can somehow make these ludicrous arguments work, while others may be making these nonsensical arguments because that's literally the only thing they have left to say. It doesn't really matter whether they know they're doing it or not, or why they're doing it or anything else. It isn't possible to communicate with someone who cannot or will not listen to you, and it doesn't really matter why. The naked truth is that even if you could make them hear you, they still wouldn't care. I wanted to talk to you about something that I don't think gets enough attention, and that is whether narcissists are dangerous. Now, of course, this is a general question, and therefore the answer will be general as well. It is impossible to predict the behavior of human beings with any accuracy at all, so just remember that every situation is a little bit different. So let's jump right in. Are narcissists dangerous? In a word, yes, they are. Narcissists tend to view people as either stepping stones on the path to what they want or as stumbling blocks in the way of it. As objects, in other words. Someone with this way of looking at things is very dangerous. One of the biggest things that keeps us from hurting or killing other people is empathy. We are able to understand emotionally how other people feel, and because of that, we don't want to hurt them. Narcissists generally don't have that ability. If they do, it is a dysfunctional and maladaptive type of empathy that is just not strong enough to override their impulses and feelings. A non-personality disordered person's inner dialogue might go something like this. Oh, I really like this necklace my friend left lying out. I wish I could have it. The desire for the necklace might lead to the impulse to take the necklace, because we're all primitive beings underneath, but morality and empathy keeps you from doing it. You might say to yourself, oh, if I took it, my friend would be hurt because she trusts me, or it's wrong to steal. This inner dialogue does not occur in a personality disordered person. They simply see the necklace, want the necklace, and if the opportunity exists, they will take the necklace. There is no consideration of morality because the narcissist dictates their own morality as whatever they want to do is okay to do. If someone stole from the narcissist would be very, very angry, but they don't experience these conflicts when it's their own behavior. There is no conflict. It's I see, I want, I take. The subject of their friend's hurt feelings or broken trust also generally would not come up. If it does, it's dismissed or rationalized away because it's just not as important as the narcissist wanting the necklace. This rationalization would be accomplished by arguments like, oh, she'll never know, or she doesn't need it anyway. The only conflict that exists within the narcissist in this kind of situation is not morality or empathy, but fear. They don't fear hurting their friend or the guilt of stealing. They fear being caught, being shamed. They fear being seen as a bad person. Nobody likes a thief, and the narcissist knows that. Now, they have no problem with being a thief. They have a problem with people knowing they're a thief. They don't want to get caught. There are times when the narcissist will appear to exercise morality in these kinds of situations, but this is actually generally because they have their eyes on another bigger goal. Like, if I take the necklace and she finds out, she won't take me on that trip to Mexico with her and I really want to go. As you can see, it isn't morality that has won here, but a bigger desire. So the conflict or the rationalization is solved by thinking along the lines of, if I satisfy my desire for this thing, the necklace, my desire for the other thing, the trip to Mexico, will not be fulfilled, and I want that thing more. The thought process of the narcissist is not, is it okay to do this, but rather, can I succeed or can I get away with doing this? If the answer is yes, most of the time they'll do it. If they think they can get away with it, they will do it. This is why they're dangerous, because they're not guided by a set of internal rules and standards, but by whatever external monitors there happen to be. If there are no external monitors, they'll do whatever they want. It has been said that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Going by that, then we would say narcissists have no integrity. Alone with a narcissist who feels that no one will know or see what they're doing, it's a very dangerous place to be. They have no empathy, no morals, no integrity, and no impulse control. A narcissist who has never been physically abusive is a narcissist who has either never felt they could get away with it or who has never felt the need to be physically abusive. It's not because they have some moral objection to hurting other people, because they don't. If they felt they could get away with it and it was necessary, they would do it. It's the same with murder. A narcissist who has never killed anybody is a narcissist who has either never felt they could get away with it or who's never felt they needed to kill anyone. Prisons are full of narcissists. These are the people who feel they have the right to take things that don't belong to them, the right to assault others, the right to rape others, the right to kill others. They feel entitled to any and everything they want just because they want it. This is partially because the dynamic of want and need is very confused in the mind of a narcissist. Everything they want, they think they need. And if they need it, that means they're entitled to it. If you need something, then you're entitled to it. You're entitled to food. You're entitled to air. They believe they're entitled to everything they want because they don't believe they want it. They feel they need it. This means if you get in their way, you are denying them fulfillment of their needs. This is not an enviable place to be in, and it doesn't just involve material things. For example, love triangles. In a love triangle, there are 3 people. One person is the desired object, and the other 2 people are competing to win this desired object. Now, this is a volatile emotional situation no matter who's involved. When narcissists are involved, it can turn into a deadly situation very quickly. Narcissists don't like competitions. They seek to control every situation because they feel that they are perpetual losers, and they can't take not just the shame of being the loser here, but the rejection that this entails as well. They prefer to simply eliminate the competition and win by default. If this requires murder, then it requires murder. They have no moral quandaries over these kinds of things. They only have practical quandaries. This resolves itself in the mind of the narcissist by thinking things like, if he's gone, she'll have no other choice but to be with me. The rage factor of narcissism is largely at play here also, which is what makes them murderous in the first place. The person in the middle of the love triangle belongs to the narcissist. This is how the narcissist feels, and how dare someone else think they can take something that belongs to the narcissist. The desired object is not seen as a person with their own feelings, wants, and identity, but as an actual object that can be stolen, as an actual object to be won. Someone trying to take something that belongs to the narcissist is in very grave danger. These people do not suffer loss well at all. This is why so many narcissists are domestic abusers and murderers. I have a theory that most, if not all, domestic abusers are narcissists, specifically borderline personalities, because of the rage, the desperation, the delusional thinking, and the inability to deal with rejection, as well as the fact that it's often only their romantic and personal relationships where they actually have problems. Borderline personality disordered narcissists often feel that without a partner to validate their existence, they don't exist at all. Losing their partner means losing themselves in a very real way. It's a threat to their very existence. Because they fear rejection and abandonment so much, they perceive it in everything even when it's not really there. They then react to this perceived rejection and abandonment with rage, hysteria, and violence in order to punish their partner and force their partner to do what the narcissist wants them to do. This in turn causes the partner to reject the narcissist for real, which leads to more abuse. The domestic abuser narcissist is essentially saying, what you want doesn't matter, what you need doesn't matter. Nothing about you matters. Only what I want matters, and what I want is for you to stay with me because I cannot face the shame of failure and the rejection of you leaving. You exist only to fulfill that need, only to stop the anxiety and the turmoil that I will feel if that happens. If you don't give me what I want, what I need, I will hurt you. If that doesn't work, I will kill you. This is an example of the power and control narcissists believe they have over other people. That belief is absolutely essential to their lives. Everything is constructed around that belief. When this belief is threatened, such as by a partner leaving or attempting to end the relationship, they perceive that as life-threatening. This is why they feel murder is a justifiable response. When the loss of a partner equals the loss of the self or the identity, this is then interpreted into a nothing left to lose situation. If you add in the revenge and punishment factor that is a core element of all narcissism, you have a situation that has become extremely dangerous. Narcissists who have killed their partners are even known to react with surprise that people don't think it was okay for them to do that. They can't understand why they're in trouble when, in their opinion, they only did what anybody else would do in the same situation. What would you do if your life was threatened? You would take out the threat. They believe this is a life-threatening situation and they will respond in extremity. So to answer the question, yes, narcissists are dangerous. Who else but a narcissist thinks that what they want is more important than someone's life? I wanted to talk to you about something that is very important to understand when dealing with narcissistic people, and that is that if you're going to continue to deal with them on any level, you must accept that this is the way they are. Many people wonder how narcissists can seem to be okay one minute and crazy, violent, hysterical, or totally cold the next minute. The thing is, this is a misunderstanding of how the personality works. People sometimes say things like, I just want them to act normally. But they are acting normally. This is their normal. They've never been any other way. And if you choose to deal with pathologically narcissistic people on any level, you have to accept that this is the way that they are. The good aspects of their personality cannot and do not exist without the rest of it. It's a package deal. Now, it's always best not to deal with narcissistic people when they have been identified, but for many reasons, people can and often do choose to continue all types of relationships with narcissists. Family, friends, romantic. Managing the relationship and the amount of stress it causes is crucial in this situation. So much of the stress caused by dealing with pathologically narcissistic people is rooted in the idea that one day the bad side of their personality will be mitigated and even disappear, or that the good side can be reached and somehow brought out all the time. This is not a realistic expectation. These aspects all exist together. They're not independent of each other. They're parts of this same whole. You cannot have one without the others. If someone is going to have any kind of relationship with a narcissist, they need to understand and accept that this is how it is. Otherwise, the stress will cause enormous damage to your life. It's important to realize that even if you want them to change these things, and even if at times they really want to change them too, the odds are very long that they're going to be able to do that. Pathologically narcissistic people are often dealing with arrested emotional development, among other problems. It may be that they are unable to change these things, and even if they are able to do so, it can be very hard and very painful. Many people are just not up to something like that, whether they're a narcissist or not. A pathologically narcissistic person with limited emotional resources or understanding and zero coping mechanisms beyond the maladaptive ones they've been using their whole lives may simply be unable to even try. And even if they could at least try, they probably don't want to. They know only their ways to get their needs met, and the idea of giving these up is like trying to learn to breathe through your ears. The goal of the pathologically narcissistic person is protection of the self, not healing. Because as humans, we must hurt in order to heal, this goes against their prime directive. The fact that such obsessive protection would no longer be necessary if they could in fact heal is information without meaning. A life where such aggressive protection of the self is not necessary is probably unimaginable for narcissists, and if it were imaginable, it would likely be seen as similar to having to swim through shark-infested waters to freedom with meat tied around your neck and 25-pound weights attached to your feet. In other words, too dangerous to attempt. Many just can't do it. Even if they can succeed at changing some of their behaviors, the mindset and the motivations behind these behaviors is not different. Often they simply change one manipulative or abusive behavior for another. For example, a person who was physically violent may stop being physically abusive, but start betraying the relationship in other ways. A person who created financial catastrophes may stop overspending, but create emotional crises and those type of catastrophes instead. The part of their personality that drives this behavior is not going to go away, and that's why. It's part of their personality. It exists alongside the quote-unquote good parts of their personality and is inextricably entwined with them. It cannot be separated. So if you're going to deal with this person, it's important to understand that these things are not separate. They're the same. The good person you love and the bad person you hate or fear are the same person. Both of these sides and every other one they show are equally genuine, for whatever that actually means. They really are that amazing sometimes, and they really are that terrible sometimes. They also aren't either of these things. They are both and they are neither. It seems impossible, and in a balanced, integrated person, it usually is. But the pathologically narcissistic person has a fractured or split personality. It's similar to the phenomenon of multiple personalities, although in a narcissist, these pieces are not fully formed personalities at all, but rather parts of a larger whole. These different parts are not integrated or cohesive. They exist apart from each other rather than in balance, and in some narcissists, they are totally denied. It's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, except that the narcissist is not usually unaware of the existence of this quote-unquote bad side because it's not separate. They know it's there. They're in denial of it. This, of course, causes it to get stronger and stronger until the entire focus of their existence has become about denying it. Healing would require the acknowledgement of these things, facing things they've spent their entire lives running from. It's just unlikely that that's ever going to happen, and even if it did, it still might not end up helping anything. Narcissists that are forced to face these things with no coping mechanisms or other protections can end up being suicidal. If you choose to deal with narcissistic people on any level, it's important to understand that you have to accept the bad with the good. You don't have to approve of it, you don't have to like it, you don't have to condone it, but you have to accept it. These things are inseparable, and you cannot have one without the other because they're both part of the same person. This is their normal, and whether it's because they can't or they won't, it's not likely to change. It's necessary to adjust expectations in order to manage the relationship and the amount of stress it causes you. It's not possible to control the behavior of other people, and you cannot love the pathology out of somebody. So if you want a narcissistic person in your life, you're going to have to take the good with the bad because they can't be separated. People often feel as if they're dealing with two different people or more when dealing with a pathologically narcissistic person, but they're not. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are not different people. The reality is that Dr. Jekyll is Mr. Hyde, and that's just how it is. Today, I wanted to talk to you about what narcissists are hiding. This is something a lot of people wonder about, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. Some of these things seem to actually contradict the narcissistic person's actions or their persona, but that's exactly the point. If you find these things hard to believe, it's just a testament to how good the narcissist act really can be. The first thing most narcissists are hiding is that they are having a lot of emotional trouble. People who are pathologically narcissistic generally have a lot of trouble with emotions, their own and the emotions of other people. They have trouble reading and recognizing them. They have trouble understanding them. They have trouble naming or defining them. They just have general trouble in this area. Many narcissistic people struggle with emotional regulation, and they find their emotions scary or overwhelming. Others are so disconnected from them that they may be unaware they're even feeling them or what they mean. Many of the coping mechanisms we see in pathologically narcissistic people can be the result of these emotional troubles, such as projection, gaslighting, idealization, devaluing, or discarding others, and more. For example, at the core of the pathologically narcissistic personality is deep-seated shame, and this drives an enormous amount of their behavior, often completely unbeknownst to them. This shame wears many masks, and it can look like many things, including rage, jealousy, envy, paranoia, self-aggrandizement, egotism, and more. When dealing with people who are truly narcissistic, it's important to remember that even though this person might be intelligent, well-spoken, and chronologically a grown-up, you are likely dealing with someone who is using a maladapted, dysfunctional adult version of the emotional coping and regulation skills of a toddler or an even younger child. This doesn't excuse their behavior in any way, but it can make it a little easier to understand. Another thing they're hiding is that they are not who they pretend to be, ever. At first glance, narcissistic people often present themselves as very different from who they really believe themselves to be. It's not a great act, nor is it capable of withstanding very much scrutiny at all, but it can be very misleading if someone is not looking closely or if they don't know what they're looking at. It's often said that narcissistic people tell on themselves, and this is true, but if you don't know what to look for, you might miss it. For example, the narcissist that is striving to come across as confident and self-assured can be very convincing. But if you pay attention, you'll notice there are holes in the performance. Because they're only pretending to be what they think is acceptable or admirable, they don't always get it right. They may be a little too braggadocious, a little too assertive, a little too self-assured. This overacting is very common regardless of what image they're trying to project. That's because this projected image is an overcompensation for the self-hatred, weakness, insecurity, helplessness, or whatever else that they feel that they're trying to hide. It's not genuine. So the helpless victim is a little too helpless or has a few too many hard luck stories. The happy-go-lucky person is a little too happy-go-lucky. The tough guy is a little too tough. The sensitive lover is a little too solicitous. These may, in fact, be actual facets of their personality, but they often seem overblown and superficial because they're being used as a diversion from other things, and in their own way, they are as over the top as all of the other facets of the narcissist personality. Remember that people who truly have a quality don't have to try so hard to prove it to everybody else and make note of behavior that contradicts the image you're being presented. Someone who is happy and confident doesn't need to hurt other people when they get upset. They aren't jealous or envious. Someone who is in control and self-assured doesn't need to control other people. They don't need to play power games. In general, people who really are whatever narcissists are just pretending to be don't behave the way that narcissists behave. Another thing they're hiding is that they don't like themselves very much. Contrary to popular belief, narcissists are not overflowing with self-esteem. They are chronically self-focused and they are self-important, but that's not the same thing. When it comes to how they truly feel about themselves, narcissists are generally at the extreme low end of the spectrum. Pathological, toxic narcissism is not the result of having too much self-esteem or self-worth. It's the result of having virtually none at all and no ability to create any. Pathologically narcissistic people are like very young children in this way. They rely on others to reflect who they are back to them because they lack the ability to form a true and stable self-concept on their own. The inability to do this is a pretty serious handicap for a human being, and it requires narcissists to use other people's reactions to them as a way to create some approximation of self-worth. This primitive survival mechanism is called mirroring, and it's the main function of other people in a narcissist's life. Regardless of the relationship, doesn't matter, this is the main purpose of that relationship. Not only do pathologically narcissistic people have no self-worth to speak of, they're often consumed with self-hatred and shame surrounding who they are. This is what is behind all of their paranoia, jealousy, envy, rage, devaluation, discarding all of their false selves, and more. If you love yourself, if you truly love and accept yourself, you don't need to create a false self to show other people because you know that who you are is good enough. Once again, make note of behavior that contradicts the image you're being presented with. It can be hard to believe this sometimes, depending on the individual you might be dealing with, but that just shows how good this act really can be. Many of them are extremely adept at hiding this. They've had to be. This is how they've survived. And some are so disconnected from their inner landscape and from their feelings that they sincerely might not even realize this is the case. However, if we pay attention to the narcissist, to their behavior, to the things they say, and we understand what we're actually looking at, if we learn to see the misdirection and the misleading for what these things really are, it becomes impossible to miss. It's like pulling the curtain back on the little man behind the big head in The Wizard of Oz. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and the illusion does not work anymore. Another thing they're trying to hide is that they're afraid. When we observe the behavior of pathologically narcissistic people, we start to see something that they would probably rather we did not see, and that's fear. It can be hard to see at first sometimes, depending on how they react to things, but to the astute observer, it becomes very obvious after a while. Fear is one of the narcissistic person's biggest motivations, even if they don't realize that. Many people believe that one of their biggest motivations is power and control, and that's true on the surface, but what is behind the desire for power and control? What makes someone feel that they need this so badly? The answer is fear. Fear of being powerless, fear of being out of control, fear of not being able to meet their own needs, fear for their own survival. They also fear the huge amounts of deep-seated pathological shame that they are usually carrying around. This is often mistaken for remorse by the narcissist and the people around them, but it isn't. Remorse is for other people, and it's usually connected to empathy. Shame is for the self, and it's not connected to empathy in any way. It's all about them. It also usually has nothing to do with anything they've done. It might seem connected, but it's only connected on the surface. The thing they've been called out for is not the real focus, nor is the hurt they've caused the other person. Being called out triggers the shame of being thought of as a bad person who does bad things. It's another example of how horrible they are. This is the focus of the shame, and this thought process does not really address or even acknowledge the wrong that they've done to the other person at all, though this can be difficult to see at first. Their focus is on them, and it stays there. The shame experienced by truly narcissistic people is generally of tidal wave proportions, and with no coping mechanisms to deal with it except their various manifestations of avoidance and denial, they live in fear of being unable to outrun this tidal wave one day. Many narcissists are actually afraid of other people too. They fear trusting anybody or caring about people. They fear allowing others to care about them. These, quote, good feelings inevitably trigger, quote, bad ones, and they are unable to deal with the emotional fallout and the confusion that follows. They enjoy somebody acting as if they care, but if someone says they care, they must be lying. If someone really does care, there must be something wrong with them. This seems to be experienced by narcissists as feelings for and opinions about the other person rather than as the self-hatred that it actually is, and it's reacted to the same way. The other person is treated as the source of the confusion, and they are blamed for that. Inside, the narcissist cannot understand or take ownership of their feelings, and so they look around for ways that other people are causing them to feel the way that they do. Narcissists don't really understand how the world works, how other people operate, and most importantly, they don't understand how they themselves operate. So many of them are simply walking around imitating what they see others do to get their needs met, and often making a big mess out of it because they don't really get it. They can't trust other people, they can't trust themselves, and they have nothing real to base anything on because of the instability of their identities. That's scary. Another thing pathologically narcissistic people are hiding is that they know something's wrong. Part of the reason that they're afraid, and one of the biggest things they're hiding, is the fact that they know, they are sure, they 100% believe that they are different from other people. Not just different, in fact, bad. One of the reasons the narcissist creates the false persona is because they are convinced that they are so unlovable and disgusting that they have to pretend to be somebody else in order to be accepted on any level. Many people think that that's true, that what they are hiding is their evil, abusive side, but that's actually not the case. The evil, abusive side is the second level of protection for what they are actually hiding. The weak, helpless, infantile core of unlovable, disgusting, horrible filth that they believe themselves to be. This goes way back to before they were ever abusive to anybody. This is very, very deep-seated. It doesn't have anything to do with anything they've actually done. Truly narcissistic people are the most self-loathing people on the planet, whether they act like that or not. The false persona exists for the same reason the abusive side exists. Both of these are reactions to needing to hide and protect who they really believe themselves to be. The false persona is the smiling greeter at the front door inviting you into the house, and the abusive side is the 85-pound attack dog in front of all the doors in the house you're not allowed to go in. Both of these things are real in their own way, and both of them are also fake in their own way. All the sides that you see are actual parts of who they could have actually been if their identity was not fractured the way that it is. But they're not stable. What is behind all those guarded doors is as close to the real truth as you can get with a pathologically narcissistic person. And the majority of the time, it's not accessible. Not even to them. That attack dog doesn't just attack outsiders who try to get in those doors. It attacks the narcissist too. That's one of the reasons they are so miserable. And that is another thing they are hiding. They are very unhappy people. As you can see from this list, narcissistic people have a shot at being the most unhappy people on the planet. It's not a surprise. They are terrified, self-loathing people who have only rigid, maladaptive, primitive coping mechanisms to deal with the really serious problems that they're facing. Consequently, they become stuck in mindsets that are harmful, self-sabotaging, damaging to themselves and others, or unrealistic, but they don't realize that. Because they're so afraid and so avoidant, and because it is a pathology, they do not realize these things, and they continue to believe other people are simply spoiling it for them somehow, either for no reason or because the narcissist's self-hatred causes them to believe that everyone else hates them as well. This usually triggers massive anger, depression, resentment, and more on top of their already existing dysregulated or completely disowned emotions. None of this is a recipe for happiness. Pathologically narcissistic people are in a constant state of survival mode, and because of the rigidity, the fixed beliefs, and the inability to adapt, many have lost any capacity for true happiness if they ever had it at all. They seem to view themselves as helpless boats adrift on the sea of life, unable to do anything but react to what they perceive is being done to them. Even when they seem to be taking action, investigation usually shows us that they are actually reacting to their own emotions or beliefs, which they often interpret illogically as things that other people have done to them. Anyone would be unhappy with that mindset, and the rigidity of pathologically narcissistic traits makes it extremely difficult for this to be changed. The arrested emotional development that we usually see in this kind of personality makes it hard for them to even see any of this, let alone change it, and the maladaptive coping mechanisms cause them to perceive harmful intentions in anybody who tries to help. So there you have it. These are some of the biggest things that Dr. Jekyll is hiding. The important thing to remember is that by understanding what you're dealing with, you can better understand the reality of the situation, which is that this is a pathology. It's not your fault. It's not your responsibility to fix it. More than that, you don't have the ability to fix it. If someone has a life-threatening illness, for example, but they refuse to go to the doctor, you can't do anything about that decision. You can't do anything at all, except decide how and if You want to move forward with the relationship. That is what educating yourself about this and understanding it helps you to do. Make informed decisions. That is how you empower yourself. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something that is important in virtually all narcissistic relationships, regardless of what kind they are, and that is the idea that you can fix the narcissist or the situation with love. This is something many people struggle with, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. We always hear that love conquers all, right? It's a common sentiment in our society, and it often seems to be validated by stories we hear, sometimes things we experience, and certainly by movies and TV and media. However, people often don't realize what this actually means. Yes, it is true that love often conquers all, but only in situations that actually involve love between two people. One person loving someone and that person using them in return is not love. Codependency is not love. Trauma bonding is not love. Narcissism is not love. These things are not love. They're one-sided and usually very toxic. Unfortunately, love from one person is not enough to override the lack of love from the other. It just doesn't work. In romantic relationships, people usually believe that the pathologically narcissistic person was never loved by other partners or their caregivers, and they may vow to show this person real love with the idea that if this person doesn't know what real love is, I will show them that they can be loved. That will fix these problems. It will prove that they are worthy. It will therefore prove that I am worthy, and then they will love me. Then we can be happy. In family relationships, people are usually trying to prove that they love the narcissist in the hope that they can finally show that they have worth, so they deserve to be loved and valued in return. Again, the idea is that this will fix the situation, the narcissist will love them, and the problems will be solved. In both of these situations, the person is operating on the belief that they can fix the problems, and by extension, the relationship and the narcissist, with love. There are several problems with this thinking. The first is that it's not only not our responsibility to fix the people in our lives, but it's not possible to do so. We are only able to accept someone as they are and decide if we want them in our lives. If we don't want them in our lives as they are, then the truth is we don't really want them in our lives. We want our idea of them or our fantasy of what they could be, and that's not the same thing. However, let's put all that to the side and really look at the situation. The idea is that someone who has never known love or being valued could be saved or fixed by receiving love. On the surface, this looks like a good, solid solution. If a lack of love created the pathologically narcissistic person's problem, then an abundance of love can remedy the problem. It makes sense in this context, and narcissists themselves may even insist that this is the case. But it's not true. You see, people usually overlook a huge hole in this logic, and that is that in order for love to be the solution, the person receiving the love has to be able to understand and recognize love in the first place. If the person has never known love, how are they going to do that? If you've dealt with a pathologically narcissistic person, you already know that they do not recognize or understand things like love, respect, consideration. They will continually insist that they're not being given these things when in fact they are being given, sometimes in huge amounts. The narcissist idea of what love is supposed to be is usually very different from what it actually is, and as a result, they don't recognize it. You cannot give somebody what they're asking for when they don't even know what it is. All that's going to result in is them never getting it. This is complicated by the fact that pathologically narcissistic people operate almost solely off of feelings, even if they don't realize it and even if it doesn't necessarily seem to be that way. Their feelings are considered facts. More than that, their feelings are considered evidence. So if they don't feel that you love them, then you don't. And it doesn't matter what you do to prove it. It's never going to be enough because feelings are facts to a narcissist. If they don't feel you love them, then you don't. And that's that. You're fighting a losing battle against the pathological self-hatred of a person with no self-worth. This often creates a vicious cycle where people just give more and more and more, hoping the narcissist will finally see and finally value them. This is extremely unlikely. And it's not about you having worth to them or not having worth to them, regardless of how it feels to you. For them, it's about the fact that they don't think they have any worth, and therefore no one can ever, has ever, or will ever love them. The fact that love does not simply appear and go exactly how they think it should and feel exactly how they think it should 24 hours a day just reinforces this idea. You become just another faker, just another liar in the long list of people who have betrayed them, let them down, sabotaged them, or otherwise were not perfect. That is the biggest reason that you cannot fix or save a narcissistic person with love, regardless of whether it's your responsibility or not, which it's not, and regardless of whether it's even possible or not, which it isn't. They can't recognize it anyway. And if you've been dealing with one, then you know that by now. It's a fruitless endeavor that results in nothing but pain for both you and the narcissist. It's a frustrating, pointless, and unevolving situation that usually results in unhappy endings because you both want things from the relationship that the other person cannot give you. You can't earn the trust of someone who does not trust themselves. You cannot earn the respect of someone who does not respect themselves. You cannot win the honor of someone who does not honor themselves. You cannot win the love of someone who doesn't love themselves. It's time to let go of the idea that you can save this person. They have to save themselves. Narcissistic people are going to have to get through life the best way that they can, and so are you. The good news is that while you can't heal the narcissist with love, you can heal yourself that way. Self-love is the way to healing. Learn to let go of the fantasy of the narcissist and embrace the reality of yourself. You deserve more, and your worth is not dependent on other people's perception of your value. Accept that someone's inability to see your worth says nothing about you, because it really, truly doesn't. It says something about them. Stop worrying about what narcissists think of you. They don't even like themselves. I hope this clears a Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by BetterHelp.com and LittleShaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that is unfortunately very common with dealing with narcissists, and that is denial. Denial is a very primitive coping mechanism, and it is the main coping mechanism of pathologically narcissistic personalities. It actually shows up in the large majority of their toxic behavior in some way, even if it's difficult to see in some situations. Many people are familiar with the concept and the expression of denial. In its most familiar and basic form, denial is understood as refusing to admit or acknowledge something that's true. It usually looks something like, "Who broke this window? Oh, it wasn't me." Or, "Did you break this window?" "No, I did not." Many people might not realize, though, that denial isn't just denying something that's actually true, which is called denial of fact. It's also denial of impact, denial of responsibility, and denial of awareness. Denial of fact is the most straightforward type of denial in most situations. Most of the time, it's just saying flat out, "No, that isn't true," or "No, that didn't happen." It can be done a few ways that are a bit less straightforward, such as omitting things or changing them to reflect a different narrative, for example, but it's always the same thing. It's always essentially saying, "No, I didn't do that." Denial of impact is denying the impact of actions, words, or situations, such as when someone says, "Oh, it wasn't that bad," or "I barely touched you." It can also look like a reframing of a situation, such as, "But your dad loves you," or "You act like I'm punching you." It's an attempt to minimize how bad a bad thing was, how much impact something had. It's essentially saying, "I did do that thing, but it wasn't that bad of a thing." Denial of responsibility is denying responsibility for actions, such as when someone says, "I was in a bad mood," or "I was drunk." It can also look like blaming responsibility for actions on other people, such as, "I only did that because you did this," or "I only hurt you because you provoked me." It's an attempt to distance the self from the actions and from accountability for the actions. It's essentially saying, "I did do that, but it wasn't my fault, and or I had no choice." Denial of awareness is denying awareness of actions, such as when somebody says, well, I don't remember that happening, or I was so tired or so drunk or so upset or whatever that I don't know what I said. It can also look like some kind of ignorance, such as, I didn't know that was wrong, or I didn't know you were going to get mad, or I didn't realize that would hurt you. It's an attempt to remove responsibility and therefore accountability for actions by claiming ignorance or by not being able to answer for them. It's essentially saying, I didn't even know I did that. As you've probably concluded, these things are omnipresent in narcissistic communication. Virtually all of their toxic behavior and a very large amount of their communication includes denial of some kind. There's another branch on the denial tree that we often see in narcissistic relationships as well, called denial of the victim. This is the denial of a person's status as a victim, which is an attempt to distance the self from the wrongness of the actions and, again, to avoid accountability for them by saying that the actions against that person were not wrong, and often that these actions were justified because the person deserved it somehow or is otherwise not a victim. Sound familiar? This is part of a sociological concept specifically regarding techniques of neutralization, but it works very well here also. Unlike other types of denial, which are mostly focused on avoiding both the reality of the situation and accountability by denying the narcissist's own actions and own responsibility in some way, this type of denial denies the narcissist's responsibility and avoids accountability by targeting the other person and their actions. It's saying, I did this, I'm aware that I'm responsible, but my actions were not wrong because this person's not a victim, and therefore it's not wrong to hurt, attack, or cheat them somehow. This is the same mentality that is often used to justify hate crimes and violence that targets specific groups of people. The so-and-so people think the such-and-such people are doing something harmful to them or to society or to their way of life or whatever. Therefore, anything the so-and-so people might do to the such-and-such people is justified and not wrong because the such-and-such people are not actually victims. They're bad. Serial killers often use denial of the victim as well, claiming that their victims don't really matter because they're trash or they're harming society somehow, or that the victim specifically attempted to harm them in some way. Many times in situations where people are utilizing denial of the victim to avoid accountability for their actions, the reason the other person is not considered a victim is often because they have been painted as the perpetrator somehow. This is very common in situations that involve narcissistic people and people in general who engage in violence or other types of antisocial behavior. They are actually the victim somehow, and they're simply defending themselves, or they're striking back for their community, or some other narrative that advances the idea that the victim of their actions isn't really a victim. They are the victim, and in many situations, they claim to be the victim of the actual victim. Though it seems primitive and even infantile due to these very qualities, due to being infantile and primitive, in other words, this is often a successful strategy, which is what makes it so dangerous. It hits at a very deep, primitive place in people. The quickest way to garner support and avoid accountability for actions that harm other people is to play on the deep-seated ego belief that bad people deserve bad things to happen to them, that guilty people deserve to be punished. Scapegoating and, quote, othering people has historically played a huge role in some of the worst atrocities to have ever occurred in human history. If you can make someone seem bad enough, then at best, no one will care what happens to them, and at worst, people will actively support or even join in attacking them. This is how smear campaigning and scapegoating work in every situation, whether they involve millions of people, several people in a family, or just between two people in a relationship of some kind. The point of smearing and scapegoating is not just to make the other person look bad and guilty or feel bad and guilty, but to make them look bad and guilty to other people. This absolves the perpetrator of their actions because guilty people deserve what they get and bad people deserve bad things. For narcissists specifically, they need other people to believe in their performed and perpetuated narratives, or they cannot believe in these narratives themselves, which becomes disastrous for their ability to regulate themselves. The narrative is that they are the victim at all times in everything. If people do not condone their actions, this can't be true. As we've discussed in other episodes of the show, narcissists need accomplices. They need people who, either knowingly or unknowingly, willingly or unwillingly, can make their performed narrative into a reality. This really cannot be overstated. The participation of others is absolutely critical here. Without that, the narcissist is just a psychotic actor performing a ludicrous one-person play on stage in front of an empty house for an audience of nobody. If no one is there to both act as a prop to make the play more realistic and to believe in the performance itself, then the true audience cannot be convinced. And who is the true audience? Well, that's easy. Who do you think it is? Who is the only person narcissists are ever thinking about or doing anything for? Who is the only person who ever actually matters to these people? That's right, themselves. Other people are both the hat narcissists are wearing during their performance and the mirror they are using to see how they look in that same hat. Other people provide both the stage dressing to make the performance believable and the feedback that it is, in fact, believable. Without both of these key components, the performance fails. And as we've discussed in other episodes of the show, this performance is how the narcissist attempts to regulate themselves in the absence of a cohesive identity or a coherent, stable self-image. Denial, then, is the narcissist's primitive, infantile way of keeping this extremely fragile construct intact. They have constructed an identity they want to believe in and make as real as possible, but they can't without the participation of other people. Since human beings can't function without some kind of identity, this is very, very important. Denial is the only way narcissists have of combating the ever-present threat of reality. Narcissists are at war with reality. Reality is their most omnipresent enemy, besides themselves, of course. Because they are an illusion and because their entire existence is a created construct predicated on the ability to convince people that it's real, actual reality, meaning objective experience, is very threatening to these personalities because their constructed identity is usually not in any way reflective of actual reality, of that objective experience. What does that mean? It means that who they pretend to be or say they are is not what people experience when dealing with them. People, of course, then present reflections of who the narcissist actually is and how they actually behave, which is extremely wounding to the narcissist. It threatens their narrative, which threatens their survival. So they deny it. They just claim that it's not true somehow. This is really the only defense they have, but in terms of actually being successful at defending anything, it's not a very good one. Simply denying something happened or denying that hurtful behavior was hurtful doesn't usually go over very well. Not only does it require mental gymnastics to engage in for themselves, it often looks delusional or ridiculous to other people. The level of denial narcissists engage in may in fact be one of the first things that causes the people around them to believe that the narcissist is mentally ill or have some kind of psychological problem, often because it's so extreme or so absurd. For example, narcissists may do or say something right in front of somebody and then deny it, even if it was like 2 seconds ago. This can be almost shocking to people, and they might just ignore it at first because they don't know how to react. This likely contributes to the quote-unquote success of denial as a defense mechanism. It just doesn't compute for people. People just cannot believe an adult person is doing that, and they don't know what to say or do in response, so they don't say or do anything. They can't really conceive of the fact that this is what's happening, so in many situations they might assume that they are the ones who got things wrong. After all, why would another adult human being deny something in this way when it's so obvious? And why would they be so adamant about it if they're not telling the truth? Unfortunately, this is a mistaken reasoning. It's an understandable one, of course, but it can have serious impact on people if they don't realize what's happening. The reality is, some adults will deny things in this manner, and they will be adamant about it even though they're being dishonest, because the stakes for them are very high, even if that makes no sense in the moment. These personalities cannot tolerate making even simple errors or little mistakes. They cannot accept or deal with being wrong, even about very small or insignificant things. These seem like stupid reasons to engage in denial, and to be perfectly frank, they are. That doesn't change how this works. Imagine then how much denial would need to be practiced in somebody's life if even the basic little mistakes and errors that people make every day were intolerable to them, let alone if they were also engaging in egregious intentional wrongdoings that harm other people or sabotage their own lives on top of that. It would need to be almost constant denial. The lives of narcissists seem to be in some ways nothing more than a complicated, desperate balancing act between all of their maladaptive, destructive, and toxic defense mechanisms and coping skills, the majority of which are primitive and don't work very well. Despite its reputation as some kind of sophisticated manipulation, which is due in part to its potentially devastating impact on other people, denial, even if it's more sort of advanced forms, is a very simplistic, childish defense mechanism. It is literally just insisting that reality is not true. That's all it is. Even small children, with their limited understanding and coping abilities, are capable of living in the real world for the most part. That tells us everything we need to know about these pathological personalities in many ways. They simply cannot handle the reality, the objective experience of life or of themselves at all. Gaslighting, blame shifting, projection, deflection, shame dumping, stonewalling, raging, the silent treatment, devaluation, discarding, and virtually every other behavior these personalities are notorious for are all expressions of denial in one way or another. Complicating the situation even further is the fact that they really do have psychological and emotional problems. Their perception really is affected, so their objective experience of events often legitimately will be different than that of other people as well. This makes it difficult to tell when they're lying and when they are genuinely wrong or mistaken. The truth is, though, it doesn't really matter. People sometimes think it does matter because they believe this means something in a moral or ethical sense, and perhaps it does, but in a practical sense, it doesn't matter at all. It changes nothing. In a normal situation, if someone is wrong or they're mistaken, they can be corrected and the situation can be resolved and or avoided, right, in the future. This does not happen with narcissists, and to believe it can is once again a mistake in reasoning. For these personalities, being caught being genuinely wrong or mistaken is likely worse than being caught lying. For narcissists, the world is a confusing, threatening, and dangerous place where they don't know many things and are therefore unable to competently protect themselves. Being wrong about anything is not just the absolute pinnacle of humiliation and shame, it's a reminder that they can't protect themselves, that they don't know things, and therefore it must be avoided at all costs. Mark Twain once said that it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. This is especially true for narcissistic personalities who feel the shame of being duped far more acutely than other people. The shame for narcissists in this context comes with fear. Fear that they don't really understand what's going on. Fear that they can't really navigate the world or the other people in it. Fear that they can't really see the dangers and are therefore vulnerable. Fear that they can't really protect themselves. Fear that people are going to find out how truly inept and incompetent they are. This shame and fear provoke rage. When reality punctures their narrative, which really does happen constantly, this is the rage that you so often see. They feel that they've been tricked, lied to, manipulated. Trying to make them understand that they either did before or do now believe things that are not true makes no difference. For narcissists, it's very simple. That which one believes is fact. That which one does not believe is not fact. If objective experience does not support the narcissist's beliefs, it will automatically be interpreted in order to do so. There is a legitimately delusional aspect to this that is not spoken about enough. Many of these personalities are walking around in a mild chronic psychotic state all the time, and they can be pushed into a more acutely psychotic state at the onset of what is arguably very little stress. The stress of something as simple as making a decision about what to have for dinner can bring on paranoia, ideas of reference, thought intrusion, thought blocking, and other examples of disorganized thinking. As an aside, this is likely one of the reasons narcissists may be misdiagnosed with things that can include psychosis, such as schizophrenic and bipolar disorders. The clinician or the therapist might not recognize what they actually are looking at. They might not recognize it as pathological narcissism, in other words. Many don't, unfortunately. But they can see the paranoia and the delusion and the disorganized thinking. They can see some measure of the overall difficulty with thinking and perception and processing and just with life in general that this person is having. So they diagnose them with something that is a severe mental illness. That is significant because these diagnoses, even when they're incorrect, still reflect the level of cognitive, perceptual, and emotional difficulty these personalities generally are having. And this makes sense. As we stated so many times in episodes of the show, these people are an illusion. They have a non-integrated identity and must, quote, perform a false self, a pseudo-integrated identity in order to receive the feedback reflections from other people that they require for self-regulation purposes. In a very real way, they don't exist. Denial of all the things that threaten this precarious existence is more than necessary. It's absolutely imperative for survival. A person who cannot regulate themselves in the way that we're talking about is headed for catastrophic collapse, which is very often literally life-threatening. Unfortunately, this means the survival of pathologically narcissistic personalities is essentially predicated on lies, denial, and manipulation. This results in their relationships with other people being unstable at best. That's a problem because narcissists are genuinely dependent on these relationships. The people on the other side of the relationship don't necessarily matter in and of themselves, but the relationship itself and how the narcissist is perceived in that relationship does matter a lot. The other person or people involved in relationship with narcissists are literally a mirror in which the narcissist gazes into to see who they are. This is why they never see you. When you look into a mirror, you don't see the mirror. You see yourself reflected back to you. This is a big part of what supply is for narcissists, and it's why many people who think of themselves as, quote, good supply or grade A supply find out that they're mistaken. As soon as you have seen the narcissist make one mistake, be wrong about anything, as soon as you have seen that they're anything less than perfect, you're no longer grade A supply, period. This is not about the other person and how great they are. It has never been about that, and it never will be. It is only, ever, and always about the narcissist. Narcissists choose people based on utility, not identity. In other words, who somebody is as a person does not matter at all. In many ways, it could be anybody who had the same status, attributes, or whatever other attractive quality. This is not necessarily a conscious act. It can be, of course, but it's also simply the way that they view the world. Identity means nothing to narcissists, and really, why would it? This is something that many people have trouble understanding, but it's the truth, and the better we can recognize that, the easier understanding these personalities becomes. This is not about anybody else, ever. No matter what they say, no matter how it looks, it is not about anybody else ever. If you look at any situation involving a narcissist, you will see that. It's only our egos that tell us that it's about us. We really only have to look to see. The effects of denial in relationships of any kind with narcissists can be devastating. It's true that they only care about things that affect them, and so by extension would only deny things that are connected to them, but since they're egocentric, they believe everything is connected to them, that everything affects them, which means denial of other people's basic realities is standard practice in these relationships. The problem is the narcissist's fantasy image, their performed narrative of who they are, and by extension who others are in relation to them and how life is in general, is completely incongruent with reality. It does not match up with people's objective experience of this person and what life with them is like. It doesn't really match up with the narcissist's objective experience either, by the way. That's why they have to practice denial. This inconsistency generally asserts itself almost immediately, and this is a threat to the narcissist. Because they are so limited, their only defense against this is just to claim that it isn't true, and that's what they do. The fact that this actually denies the realities of other people, which can cause them serious psychic and emotional damage, likely does not occur to narcissists, and it's extremely unlikely that they would care even if it did. After all, you're denying their reality, you're causing them serious psychic and emotional damage. Their narrative of reality doesn't match up with actuality, so the damage they're sustaining isn't your fault in any way, nor is it even reasonable to get upset about it at all, but that doesn't occur to them either, and again, it wouldn't matter if it did. Remember, this is about them only, always, and ever. Because of this, dealing with narcissistic personalities includes almost constant gaslighting, both intentional and the type that occurs as the result of vastly differing perceptions, and a huge amount of ego trauma. The ego is the part of us that speaks as I. Ego trauma then consists of attacks on your sense of self and who you believe yourself to be. Because the narcissist's image of themselves is dependent on the participation of others, in some ways it really only exists in comparisons and relation to other people. In other words, it has no merits of its own. It can only be seen when there's something else to contrast it with. This means, for example, that narcissists can only be good if by comparison somebody else is bad, or can be made to look bad. They can only be the hero if by comparison someone else is the victim. These comparisons and relations to others are the engine that make this vehicle go. They are, in fact, the entire substance of the narcissistic false self, of this performed narrative, which is the only identity narcissists really have. It must be contrasted against other people, for all intents and purposes, without being compared or related to others in some way, without being bounced off of them and reflected. In other words, these people wouldn't really exist at all. In a very real way, their identity is entirely predicated on other people. In order to preserve and protect their identity narrative then, this means that narcissists have to have narratives about other people too. And they have to behave according to those narratives about other people in order to perform their own. which means treating other people as if they really are what the narcissist needs them to be by comparison, either for good or for bad. They will be treated like a villain if the narcissist need to be the victim. They will be treated like a victim if the narcissist need to be the hero. They will be treated like a loser if the narcissist needs to be the winner. They will be treated like an idiot if the narcissist needs to be the genius, etc. This results in massive ego trauma for the people around these personalities because they are relentlessly being reacted to, interacted with, and constantly treated as if they genuinely are somebody that they're not. It's like accidentally walking onto a movie set where they've been shooting the movie for months and you're playing an already existing role that you're unaware you've even been given. People are reacting to you in ways that you have no context for and don't understand. They're referencing things that you have no idea about because the character you're suddenly and unknowingly playing did those things, not you. You have no idea what anybody is talking about or why they're reacting to you the way they are or why they're treating you the way that they do. Narcissistic personalities have a very old script that they are using, and you are very likely not the first person to have played the exact same role in this performance. The people playing the roles might change, but the roles themselves never change at all because the performed identity of the narcissist is always the same, and so is the story that they use to get it over. It's like watching a Shakespearean play. The story is always the same, the roles are always the same, only the actors are different. This is why people can go from being a villain to a savior or a winner to a loser and vice versa. The roles are always the same, and who plays them does not matter. If you're dealing with a narcissistic personality, understand that their reality is not the same as yours. It's really not, and they are nowhere near as psychologically adaptable and flexible as you are. When you are asking them to be honest, for example, or to change a behavior, it's very likely you're asking them to do something that for all intents and purposes, they legitimately cannot do without incurring extreme psychological damage. Even if they could, it's very likely the fear and the shame bundled with this would stop them from even considering it. This is one of the biggest reasons prognosis for pathological narcissism is so poor. Not only is the personality structure rigid and set up to deny anything that can even be construed as negative or bad, not only are their behaviors experienced as egosyntonic for the most part, which means that the things they do don't cause them discomfort in comparison to their self-image, which is likely due in part to their ability to deny, justify, and to their extremely skewed perception. But even if they do see a problem of some kind, the disproportionate fear and shame attached to these things stops them from addressing or even acknowledging it a large majority of the time. They simply will not do it, and anyone who has dealt with one of these personalities can attest to how far they will go in order to avoid that. So what does this mean for you? It means that if you've been dealing with a pathologically narcissistic personality, you've likely been being relentlessly forced into a reality that does not match your actuality. This is often very confusing for people, and it can be very damaging. And even if you've never been confused about the things and always thought that they were crazy, the frustration and the pain of being unseen and unheard is bad enough just on its own. You're not in a real relationship with another person. You don't even really exist in the relationship at all because they don't. It's almost like that movie, The Never-Ending Story. The whole relationship is a space that exists solely in the imaginations of the people that are involved. Without that to fuel the creation of the space and make it into something, there's just nothing left. If you are dealing with a pathologically narcissistic personality, it's important to stay very grounded in your objective experience and to not attempt to use narcissists for reality testing. That would be like asking a blind cat if the color you just painted your living room works with your furniture. Not only can they not see it, they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. A narcissist's perception is skewed, their cognition is affected, it's completely unstable and based solely upon what they're feeling in any given moment, and they may lie on top of all that if there's an angle they can exploit or a benefit for them in some way. They are the exact wrong person to ask about whether reality makes sense or not. If they're the only person that's around, either wait until somebody else is around, or even better, work on trusting and validating yourself. Under no circumstances should you allow a narcissist's perception or narrative of reality to supplant or replace your own. It's not a good idea to let them have any influence in any way, to be perfectly honest. It sounds harsh, but it's probably not overstating it to say that in many situations, a narcissist's perception of events likely should not even be considered at all. It's simply too skewed, too unstable, and too egocentric to be relied upon in any situation, but most especially situations that involve them or anything that affects them. Since they're so egocentric, that means everything. Their perception of reality only works for and benefits them, at the expense of other people 99% of the time. This includes you. We don't use the words never or always on this channel very often because most things really should not be spoken about in absolute terms, but narcissistic personalities are never safe enough to have a level of influence over anything so important, ever. Their understanding of the world does not include consideration or even awareness of the rights, feelings, experiences, perceptions, or even the actual reality of other people as people. If it has not been made clear by now, let's make it clear. Pathologically narcissistic people are not living in the same reality as other people. They are not reliable narrators of anything due to their perception problems, their slavish dedication to their own interests, and their flexible relationship with the truth. Their only weapon against reality and the constant extreme threat that reality represents to their narrative is denial. This results in the relentless denial of the reality's perception and experiences of other people because nobody else's experience of the narcissist matches up with the narcissist's identity narrative of themselves. Though this is a primitive, even infantile defense mechanism, it can result in serious damage to people who are subjected to it, especially children. The best way to combat this is to understand what's going on and why it's happening. The fact is, denial has no effect on reality. Reality doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. Things still are whatever they are. A narcissist's identity narrative doesn't change who they really are, or are not, as the case may be. Their identity narrative of you doesn't change who you are either. It's up to you to make sure your own self-image doesn't become polluted with their garbage opinions. Nobody should ever have the ability to tell you what to think of you. Stay grounded, don't internalize foolishness, and learn to validate yourself. When you truly accept yourself for who you are, when you really know who you are and who you are not, it makes it much easier to view these opinions for what they really are. The desperate attempt of a very limited, arrested personality to live in a literal fantasy world where they are not as limited by pretending everyone else is more limited than they are. It's ridiculous bullshit, in other words, and it doesn't deserve your validation. I hope that clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via messenger, via email, and through Skype worldwide. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, clinics, and seminars, so if you're interested in seeing what we're running this month, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. And if you would like to join our support group with access to exclusive content and weekly support meetings, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. We've opened up subscriptions on the channel, so if you're interested in seeing what the perks for that are, you can use the link down below in the description of this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by BetterHelp.com and LittleShaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day.